I am on the clock in 23 slow drafts. We'll make those picks today. We'll spin the wheel. We'll talk about everything that's happened in the last 10 days while I was on vacation since I've last streamed. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. What is up, guys? Welcome in. We have plenty of drafts to get to. I did make the drive across the state line yesterday. Welcome in, Ashton. How you doing, buddy? Entered 100 drafts. I've been mostly doing like 40 draft batches right when I got into Oregon yesterday. The slow puppy launched, and I was really going to be focused on upping my BBM numbers on this trip, and also the eliminator, which you guys know I'm really into. Have written the 2 strategy guides on over at the Substack. Go subscribe there, bengretch.substack.com. Also subscribe here, like, turn on notifications, all of that good stuff. Oh, hey, you also made the pilgrimage to Oregon. We got another Washingtonian here. Noticed you in a bunch of my rooms. We will, I guess, see you, I'm sure, today in a bunch of those rooms. But yeah, we got a ton of new drafts. I had planned, like I said, to get into a bunch more of the eliminators, a bunch more of the BBMs. And then I saw the slow puppy was there, and I was like, man, I want to get into that. Had to adjust literally as it launched, like as I was in Oregon. Like I had just kind of pulled over across the river, and the fill rate on the fast puppy was literally 0.7% when I was there. I mean, it had happened just when I was on my drive down there. And so I entered a bunch of those as well, which I decided to, since graphic design is my passion, I decided to make a thing that shows what I actually entered, but I can't find the download right now. I was going to pull up, as you guys know, the production value on the show is unmatched. It is at the absolute top of the industry. Our buddy Pete Overzet would be so proud. I'm downloading it again. I made this really cool visual. You guys are going to appreciate you. Let's get into this. I'm going to find it. Here it is. And now I'm going to share it. This is as good as it gets right here. Oh, look at that. That's not even this. That's not even the window I'm trying to share. I'm trying to share just the image. There we go. Look at that. See how seamless that was? New draft breakdown. This is what I decided to enter. 35 BBMs, 30 slow puppies, 25 eliminators. I also wanted to get into some sprints on this trip. I wanted to get into a few more marathons. So I threw 5 of those in each. It's a hodgepodge of different leagues and drafts. But that's what we're going to be looking at with the next group of slows as we go through. Remember the last one, I had way too many of the Superflex puppy. We're doing way too many Superflex drafts. I didn't allocate real well. Mostly BBMs here, some of the slow puppies, a decent amount of eliminators, which I really enjoyed talking through, as we mentioned. And then, we'll sprinkle in some of these marathons, sprinkle in a few of the sprints, which actually haven't all filled. So if any of you guys are interested in drafting against me, there's only one left that's unfilled at this point. There is 5 spots remaining in one of my sprints that I entered yesterday morning about this time. So there you go. Go hop into that. Draft against me. All right. We got to make some picks. We got to start jumping in. Let's find the ones that are the shortest. There's a few that are 1 hour. we have a lot to do, but it's mostly all first round picks. So it's not like it's going to be super exciting on a lot of these. Like, I don't even know what I just clicked on. I always forget that. But okay, so here's an eliminator. We're at 112. Oh, that's super interesting. I don't know that I've done an eliminator from the 112 yet. You guys know I really like kind of a 0 RB structure in the eliminator. The buys are a little trickier for these receivers. I did do one early from the 112 and I took Gibbs, but I don't love that, man, because the 7-8 becomes so tricky for wide receiver, especially now that you're not going to get at 84, 85, you're not going to get like when I was first doing these eliminators, maybe I had a shot to get Deontay Johnson or Rashee Rice or somebody to fall through the 7th round. Those guys are in the 6th round now. So you basically have 6 picks until it feels like that wide receiver window is closing. And I like to hit tight end in here as well, potentially, before the 84, 85 picks. I think these first 6 picks, really, you can't really afford a running back. Now, one of the things I've talked about with the eliminator is how the payout structure works and how quickly the people devolve. We've pulled up the charts and we talked through it. I had a really good conversation with Eric Beinfort on Spike Week on this recently. Go check his pay, that feed out if you want more information there. But one of the big discussion points is you start earning money and you start to become profitable, I believe, around week 9. I mean, more than half of the field is eliminated by week 5. I mean, it's fascinating how quickly the eliminations start to compound and how much of how many of these drafted eliminator teams will be absolutely toast by like the middle of the season. And so one of the things you can do when dealt a tricky hand is actually stack late buys, and you're not really building a winner, but you're building more of a cash game. If you make it to week 12, you actually 5x your buy-in, you get a $50 payout. If you make it to week 14, you 10x. This might be a build where the intelligent way to play it, or my way of playing it, whether that's intelligent or not, is to really hammer week 12 and 14 buys. I can do that at the 3-4 turn with Zay Flowers and Tank Dell as options. This is going to be, you already dealt a bad hand from the 112. I'm now playing it as like a cash game, basically. We're going to stack week 12 buys there. We might stack week 12 and 14 buys exclusively in this build. So that'll be fun. That'll be fun to think through. Let's do another eliminator pick. This one from the 107, and now I'm staring at my guy Bijan at the top of the queue, but I really do like the 0 RB builds. I already did an eliminator last night where I did start with a Bijan. I wanted to mix it up a little. I think if he has the legendary upside type ceiling that I think he can have with that Rams coaching staff coming in, the heavy snap rates and personnel usage that they can give to all of their players, frankly, but especially the running back. We saw Kyron Williams have the 2nd highest average snap share last year. That's a huge key. If Bijan can get that, his workload will be very, very consistent. And that would be great for the eliminator if you have an anchor running back build and Bijan Robinson has that type of season. However, I do really like the 0 RB structures in these. So I did take a Bijan in one of these spots in one of the eliminators. I'm going to go Puka on this one. I feel like he's a really strong eliminator pick. He's got the early buy, the consistent volume element, all the things I just said about the Rams coaching staff, the way that they consolidate snaps, routes, touches in their offense. We'll grab Puka in this eliminator. I like taking Garrett Wilson over Puka in a lot of the formats, BBMs, some of those things. I'm very high on Garrett Wilson's ceiling. And so I like getting more exposure to Puka in the eliminator where, some of that weekly consistency thing feels a little bit more stable maybe. And then more particularly, because that's the weekly consistency and stability is a hard thing to predict. More particularly, the bye week is a is a key one for him in the eliminator format. It's a good spot to get some exposure to him for me. We got a marathon here with only an hour remaining. This is just straight up who's going to score the most points, right? This is a fascinating format where you can make a case to be more toward the anchor running back, right? But Bijan already goes 104. I don't even have him at 107. And so for me, this decision is solely between these top two names. It's Justin Jefferson, who I do think is like, I mean, look, I understand the concerns about a rookie quarterback offense. I understand all of that stuff. And it's just sort of like, he's Justin Jefferson, man. Like, he elevates. There's a possibility we look at this next year and go, why did we ever not have this guy as the wide receiver one? He's the best wide receiver of this generation. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. I'm saying that is one outcome for this year for sure. And in terms of a guy who can just create so many easy passing situations by winning on routes over and over and over again, that can make it viable for a rookie quarterback. The Vikings are going to trail in games. They're going to have to throw. If McCarthy's that bad, they brought in Sam Darnold. They could go to him. I mean, he could also be that bad. But I do think, you kind of expect a base level of competency at quarterback. I've been taking a lot of Jefferson, right at his ADP. And in this batch, I did a lot of my first round picks last night and this, not this morning so much because I saved these for the stream, but earlier in the day yesterday, I guess, after I got back. And I landed on a lot of 106s. I landed on a lot of Jefferson picks, or 105s. I'm still taking him ahead of Amon-Ra. But I see the concerns as well. I'm just not going to be completely out on Jefferson. I think in this spot, because I've taken a ton of him, think about overall total points, I do think the rookie QB stuff and some of the QB concerns can sink some of their games. I guess the way that I think through it is Jefferson's still going to have the weekly ceiling to be an absolute star, but his overall stat line probably can get drawn down, and I do understand why that's impacted ADP. This feels like an anchor running back in the marathon option because I haven't gotten a lot of Brees. I'm so high on Bijan that I'm not getting as much Brees as I want, but I'm high on Brees as well. I fired this stream over onto Twitter. We got Cooter Doodle jumping in from the Twitter side. Jump over to YouTube, subscribe for anyone who's watching on Twitter, trying to grow the channel. I'm in too many slow drafts. That's absolutely the case. But welcome in. Brees Hall there for the marathon specifically. This is a BBM at 105. Like I said, I've been taking a lot of Jefferson here to the point where it's almost like I have too much. You can't see the exposures in the drafts you're in, obviously, but I mean, I'm in a lot of drafts and I've just clicked Jefferson many, many times. We'll do Jefferson one more time. If I have a bunch more 105s, you might see me start to take some Amon-Ra or even some Bijan at that spot. Let's go to this other BBM that's got an hour on the clock. 111, easy pick. Garrett Wilson is there for the taking. We've seen A.J. Brown come up in ADP, which, you guys know I love A.J. Brown. If you're watching on Twitter, you can click over to my profile and you can see that he's still my banner and has been for years. Probably my favorite player in the league. But the price for me is a little rich relative to kind of what his ceiling can be. I made this case last year. The idea was that he's so good. He's so efficient. He's going to be a productive player, but he'd be more like hitting a triple than hitting a home run from this cost. That was the way that we, kind of ended up. I think I stole that from Pat Kerrane, but kind of ended up describing that. And I think that's what we saw last year. It's why he's going in the same range. The guys that he was going around last year were Garrett Wilson, and his quarterback got hurt, but he's still there even after a down season. A.J. Brown didn't rise even after a good season. I think that's interesting, or at least a good first half. The second half was a little weaker. The other two that were going there were CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown. They sort of proved that point. They showed the breakout ceilings where they're going in the top 5 wide receivers this year. I think that's a meaningful distinction. I think that's an important thing to consider. Doesn't mean we can't be on Brown this year, but I kind of see it similarly, where Garrett Wilson to me is still a guy, if Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy, that can finish in a way that will push him into the top 5 wide receivers the next season. It's a home run, even though he's a 1-2 turn guy. And Puka Nacua, I think, is like fairly obviously that, coming off the greatest rookie wide receiver season ever, or arguably the greatest rookie wide receiver season ever. There's some issues with Nakua's profile. It's not perfect. I've argued that I think, last year was probably something like an 80th percentile outcome for him, a high end, everything kind of broke right situation for him. He saw a ton of volume in the first 2 games, like a quarter of his targets for the season. In those first 2 games, like 35 targets in the first 2 games, 20 and 15, if I remember right. And that's also a good thing, right? It's a positive that he saw that much volume. So my argument would be, in terms of taking a step forward statistically, it's trickier for him to build on that. At the same time, he doesn't really need to. If he has the same season, he's a star again. So anyway, I like those 2 guys. AJ Brown's, again, one of my all-time favorite players, but I believe should be going behind both of them consistently. Let's jump back into another eliminator. We're at the 111 here. Again, I like the 0RB builds. I don't love Garrett Wilson's buy, but I just got done talking about him. He's the easy pick at 111 for me. There's kind of a teardrop after that, especially in the eliminator format, where I don't want to be running back in the first round. Gibbs is sort of a transition tier type. Drake London, for me, sort of a transition tier type. But getting Wilson there, that's just going to be a quick, easy pick. Let's jump into another eliminator, 103. Now, this is fun. Get Lamb, we get McCaffrey. There's a lot of great names here. I guess it's not going to be that surprising, because you guys have seen me take Tyreek as high as 101 in the eliminator format. His weighted targets per out run, absolutely stronger than every other player in the NFL by a meaningful amount. The routes run side of that is the concern. They kind of don't run him on every snap, and they don't play as many snaps. They don't play as fast as like a CeeDee Lamb in Dallas. He'll probably run 100 fewer routes than CeeDee Lamb this year. But the volume concentration per route is so massive. That Mike McDaniel can get him the ball, and you think about an eliminator format, like, he's going to get design touches in every game. He's a part of the game plan every week. I don't know that defenses can take him out of the game plan. If they could, they certainly struggled to do so last year. Although our comment here in the draft applet is relatively quiet in playoff loss from 6 months ago. He does. Every player can be a little bit quiet at times, but gets banged up late in the season last year, misses a game, still 1,800-yard season. I do wonder if he would be the wide receiver 1 if he didn't get hurt late, and if he finished closer to 2,000 yards, because he was pacing for that. Maybe Lamb would still be going ahead of him, age concerns and everything else. But I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that Tyreek Hill could be the breakaway fantasy stud this year, or, heading on the wrong side of the age cliff for the people that are down on him. I can see that as well. One more eliminator here at the 108. Man, interesting. I just took a Puka pick here. The AJ Brown bias is nice. The concern with Brown, they are doing things a little bit differently probably this year with Kellen Moore. The conversation is that they're going to kind of blend the last offense with the new offense. Maybe there's a little bit higher of a pass rate. Maybe there's a little bit less of the the QB running that saps skill position touches, right? This must be in reference to AJ Brown. What if he doesn't take an 8-week break from 30-point games? Yeah, AJ Brown certainly has the weekly ceiling. Absolutely. And without question. I'm probably not going to go Bijan here. Brees here. I'm kind of debating whether I should do one with AJ Brown in the eliminator. I think it's tough with their offense. And again, with how quickly you can get eliminated from these things. It does. You have to have I've written about this. You do have to have a top 1% team overall. See a comment from Best Ball Guy, says Jefferson. Next question. I think that must be related to a prior draft, because Jefferson is gone in this one. You do have to have one of those really, truly elite teams to be able to consistently. I think people are thinking of the eliminator as a floor contest. You got to not get eliminated. You got to finish in the middle of your pack every week. those pods, not only do the advance rates get lower, they get harder quick. Again, 2/3 of the field are going to be eliminated, roughly 2/3 by the first bye, by week 5. You're not even going to reach the bye with half of your teams if you're, the average roster. That's how many are going to be eliminated from the total field right away. So I'm sort of approaching it from this perspective. I actually think you need to be seeking extreme upside. You need to be seeking a team that that's not going to finish middle of the pack every single week. That's going to dominate every week. The type of team that could win a prize for overall total points scored for the full season, for the regular season, consistently high end ceiling every single week. That means you need to have a real ceiling, but you also want sort of, as I've been talking about, stability plus ceiling. You want floor plus ceiling. You want consistency. I don't know if Philly's pass rate is going to be consistent enough for me. When they get ahead, they do like to run the ball pretty heavily. They do have Saquon. AJ Brown can have some down games. Puka can too, but I feel like, I guess, a little bit more confident in the consistency of his volume on a weekly basis. I feel that way about Garrett as well, frankly, if Rodgers is able to stay healthy the whole season. But again, the bye week pushes me towards Puka in this format. So I'm going to do another Puka eliminator build there. I definitely do some hero RB teams with Bijan Breece. I mentioned I did one in the eliminator that we'll get around to. I do fewer of them in the eliminator than I would in BBM and some of those. Got a comment here. It says, I reached on AJ a little to get some Olave. London starts with him, and I feel pretty good about it. I also can't stop myself from grabbing Bijan every chance I can. Who can you not stop yourself from taking? I mean, that best answer to that in this range is probably Garrett Wilson. I'm like actively trying not to take him in every draft. Bijan is another good answer for that. I structurally don't want to be taking too many early running backs. I do think the wide receiver window is a real thing this year, and it's a tricky thing to see. I just got done writing a piece over on my Substack, bengretch.substack.com, about why I think there will be running back scoring late this season. I think, I called it the biggest reason zero RB can smash this year is hiding in plain sight. The plain sight element is we don't have as many elite running backs, right? We don't have the studs that we could project for all this meaningful volume. The reasons that the dead zones, I realize the dead zone is different nowadays than it has been, but the reason the dead zone exists and has existed in the past is the guys that we don't feel as confident about from a wisdom of the crowd's perspective, projecting as a lead back or projecting for big workload from a skill perspective, from the ways that the offense does things, etc. It's like Dameon Pierce last year was ended up being a dead zone back. He wasn't a right fit for the new offense. They just moved a different direction with Devin Singletary. Cam Akers, another example. That's where Kyron Williams came from. Then you have the ambiguous backfields as well, which is where Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane came from. No one was really drafting a Dolphins running back particularly high. And all those guys, the later ones, scored meaningfully last year. We don't have a plethora of elite young running backs, in large part because the draft classes from 2019 to 2022 have not hit in the way that, typically a 4-year running back draft class would hit. We've had a lot of busts. We've had a lot of major injuries. It's been really tricky for the running back position. The guys that should be in their primes right now, and the stars, are not. Collectively, they're not. I mean, if Breece Hall is there, already went through a major knee injury last year, was not drafted highly, was one of the reasons that you could target the dead zone for running backs last year. But you had other guys like J.K. Dobbins who were in a similar position, and he had another major injury and is now, we don't know what he's going to be the rest of his career. Obviously all pulling for him, but that's part of the reason that there aren't these great young running backs is those classes have not hit in a major way. CEH, Najee Harris, these guys, the market is now telling us they don't buy into the skill set. They're going a lot lower. Those guys were first-round running backs. those are the guys that, 4 years into their career, 3 years into their career should be going in the first few rounds. We don't have that right now. It's a multi-year thing at the running back position, less confidence in the star running back in a lot of spots. That's a big reason why this year's running back draft class, while only a few backs went in the first 2 days, we had a couple go in round 3. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks, the only one who goes in round 2. I think it was 4 that went in round 3. So 5 total in the first 2 rounds. First 2 days. And then we had a bunch come off in round 4. Despite most of those guys being round 4 guys, it's fairly easy to project a lot of those later round running backs, rookies, as stepping into like number 2 roles. Like there's just not, or even like meaningful committee roles right away, potentially. There's just not like clear stability in there's only 32 offenses around the league, but right now 25 or so of them are either ambiguous or they have a lead back who we're projecting for volume where you're like, I could see this guy not actually maintain this volume all year, which is sort of why the dead zones exist in the past, right? Like the idea of guaranteed touches at running back is never truly guaranteed. You can lose that volume fairly quickly. And when you have that many teams set up in that way, to me, I think the probability of getting that late round running back scoring is increased. It's part of this idea of structural drafting is understanding where there are pockets of value and where production is going to come from. And, part of the reason last year I was advocating to be drafting running backs in the dead zone was not just Breece Hall and ETN, but it was, you had Dobbins and some of the other guys who didn't hit, but it was a group of young players. And traditionally the ones that have hit in the dead zone are young players that the market doesn't really know who they are yet. So the wisdom of the crowds element doesn't truly know how good they are yet. And so they're just kind of understating how good that player could potentially be in a ceiling case. And the way to say that is that the next year they would be first round picks. Well, Breece Hall was that guy, right? Jahmyr Gibbs was that guy from the dead zone last year. They're first round picks now for a reason. They were studs last year and the market now buys into it. We just have more concern about lead backs in more offenses right now. And then when you pocket all of that together, it's the other reason I really love the elite tight end strategy this year, because I think if you're fading the elite tight ends, you're trying to parlay 7 really good profiles all busting from how I look at it. There's too much value in that group, very similar to what I see with the lack of early running back, meaning more ambiguous backfields and more potential for late round running back scoring to bubble up in a meaningful way this year. And so the shape of fantasy scoring does feel like it's leaning one way. And this is why you're seeing wide receivers get hammered early. And you continue to see the comments, like my buddy Davis Maddock had a comment earlier today, I think, where he was like, what if, one of these late round receivers really smashes, it could flip the slate on its head. And I get that line of thinking, but traditionally speaking, the high end receiving scoring, the real receiver upside comes prior to the double digit rounds. Puka Nacua, massive outlier last year in that regard. There's typically solid wide receiver performance in the late rounds, but you want true wide receiver upside. We know who the studs are. It's a little different. It's a little more opportunity based at running back. We didn't know Kyron Williams was a stud going into last year, right? That's the consistent multi-year trend, that the running back production can come from the late rounds in a meaningful way. Casey's been reading PFR all week to prepare for the Remember That Guy segment. GM to you guys. Welcome in. The crew is here. We're just talking a little dead zone. We're talking a little, where's fantasy scoring going to come from this year? Where's the pockets of value? And how does that impact structure? How does that impact how you should build your teams and what that means for overall player exposure? To put a little bow on it, the way that I've been putting it, and we've been putting it on some of the shows recently, is I have a hard time having my overall early running back exposure, like first 7 round running back exposure, too high. There's a lot of those guys. I tweeted about like Pacheco the other day and why I'm having a hard time drafting him. If Pacheco hits, I don't think that he necessarily has legendary upside. I don't think he has that type of efficiency in him. And again, he's played enough years now where he's not like a pure unknown. We know what he is within this offense. We know the type of player he is. Typically, a true dead zone breakout is a rookie or a second-year player. Like, we just don't know yet. Pacheco's played a couple years. And the market is telling you that they don't think he is a first-round talent, even though he's in that amazing situation, even though he has the potential for huge opportunity. There's some question about whether he can elevate in an efficiency way to get to true legendary scoring, right? Legendary upside scoring. And because of that, what the wisdom of the crowd is telling you about an Isaiah Pacheco, and because of the particular landscape that I just described that I see for 2024, I find it hard to have too much of him because I think his small win profile will be valuable and can be valuable in a generic season at that cost, but won't be as valuable as the other picks that can truly smash from that range, including elite tight ends or some of the receivers, although I'm not in love with the receivers at the 4-5 turn by any means. But then the second side of that is, what if I'm right on Javonte Williams, right? What if the late, not even just late round, but just round 10-ish, really favorable running back range in drafts right now? What if a lot of points come from that range, and then the 2v2s that you're saying, okay, well, I took Pacheco in round 4, round 5. It's not just about 2v2s, but I mean 3v3s, 4v4s, whatever you want to do. Like, if there's a lot of running back scoring from that range that is not meaningfully different than Pacheco, I feel very confident that I'm not going to get buried by a Pacheco small win season. Now, if he has legendary upside and I'm wrong there, that's where you're going to bury me. But yeah, I think he's a hard pick. Let's keep cruising. Let's make some more slow draft picks. If you're watching on Twitter, on X, I'm not typically going to broadcast to Twitter. I've done like 15 of these or so over on the YouTube channel at Stealing Signals. Go subscribe, turn on notifications. I don't always give a lot of leeway for when I'm going to go live or a lot of notifications. I kind of just fire it up last minute. These picks are all kind of boring because they're early picks. I mean, here's one where we get a 206. I took Justin Jefferson at 107. We get Brees going 109 and Gibbs at 202, the 14th overall pick. Every other pick so far, wide receivers, other than, of course, CMC and Bijan before my first pick. Puts us in the middle of round 2 where the ADP value is Jonathan Taylor. I like taking some Taylor. This was a puppy, right? Man, this is like, again, the production value through the roof. I got to find that draft again now. I was on this slow puppy. Okay. Let's do Taylor in the puppy. Let's get a little weird with it. We'll do an anchor running back. I probably in a BBM just take, and actually Waddle matches Jefferson's buy. So actually I think Taylor's my pick there. I was going to say I'd probably take Waddle, but I don't know that I really want to do Jefferson Waddle. Both of my top 2 star picks have the same buy. It's not a huge consideration, but it's a minor one. A reasonable tie break when Taylor's the ADP discount in this draft. Here's another slow puppy. We are at 111. Easy pick, right? You guys heard me. I'm going to take Garrett Wilson there every single time. Literally every time. You're not going to see me take Gibbs or like a Drake London or something over Wilson. Maybe a Nakua sometimes, maybe an AJ Brown sometimes, just to get some diversification. You're not going to see me take anyone else. Started this one with Bijan at pick 7. Definitely see the legendary upside ceiling with him. To wrap up that point, I wanted to say, part of the reason also when I want to collectively be underweight on my running back exposure in the first 7 rounds, I want to have exposure to CMC, Bijan, Breece Hall, Devon Achane, both Gibbs and Taylor. I want to have some exposure to. I still think Kyron's a good value and is, he's starting to slide. So you can start to talk about some of the wisdom of the crowd elements and some of the dead zone type elements that might be that I might be missing, that there's more risk with Blake Corum, and the market feels that there's more risk with Blake Corum than I'm acknowledging in my own position, that I'm kind of stubbornly feeling like he shouldn't be a late third round guy. He should be like a 2-3 turn guy at worst. When you talk about a dude that was in that role last year and was so effective in that role last year, I understand they drafted his clone, but that doesn't mean that they're going to trust Blake Corum right away. And Sean McVay's history, like last year, they were talking up Zach Evans in the offseason, and they just never even played. Like, they didn't trust him at all. Even when Kyren Williams went down and Cam Akers had already been traded, it was like, we're going to go sign Darrell Henderson off the street and play him with, Royce Freeman, who are going to activate from the practice squad. They already had Zach Evans on the roster. A lot of people wanted to spend their fab on Zach Evans when Kyren got hurt last year because he was on the roster. Royce Freeman was the practice squad guy. Darrell Henderson was the street free agent. Those are the guys that played. Zach Evans didn't even make it on the field. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the same deal for Blake Corum, because I think part of the reason they drafted Blake Corum is, he comes from a Jim Harbaugh offense. He's, said to be very pro-ready in a lot of the different ways. But, like, there's something to be said about the fact that, they drafted his doppelganger, but, like, Kyren Williams is already in the role. Like, he's the guy that they really like. They're saying we want to get another version of him because we like him so much, right? We want to be able to run our offense the way that Kyren Williams makes us run our offense, and then also have a guy, if Kyren Williams gets banged up, that can do the same stuff. We're going to redesign our whole offense and draft the new player, all to make it fit this player that we like that much, that things worked really well with last year. People are telling themselves that Blake Corum's going to step in and take that role and have the snap share, and I have a hard time with that. What is this name? Dan Snyder's Hemorrhoids? It's a pretty good Underdog name. I'm a fan. Anyway, Kyren's another one I want to get some exposure to. So these guys in the first few rounds that, traditionally speaking, we get the true, irreplaceably elite, legendary running back ceilings traditionally come from the first and second rounds. It's a little bit of a different landscape. I can stretch that to the third round and make my case for Achane and Kyren. But it starts to get tricky for me in the fourth and the fifth, when I'm also seeing the wisdom of the crowds element, the lack of buy-in on the true ceiling. Travis Etienne is a really interesting conversation, because he was one of those guys that I liked in the dead zone last year because he was a second-year player, and I felt like the market just wasn't understanding what he could be, what his profile was prior to his foot injury that cost him his whole rookie season, but coming out of Clemson. And the first half of last year, it looked like he was going to be a first-round pick in 2024, and then the second half of last year happened, and now the market is saying once again that it's not buying in, and we have more information. Now we have 2 seasons of playing. In addition to that lost rookie season, he's going into his 4th year of his contract. And when the market is not saying they're buying in at this point, it's a little bit scarier. We have more information. We saw for a stretch what the peak scoring potential of Etienne probably looks like, how good he could potentially be. Now, in his defense, you want to actually get into some of his advanced metrics. His missed tackles for stuff, his yards after contact stuff was all actually pretty solid last year. Didn't fall off the way his yards per carry did. He was a 5+ yards per carry guy in 2022. He's down to like 3.8 last year. I think 5.1, 3.8. The advanced stuff didn't support that kind of a drop off. It was just probably some situational stuff, run blocking, especially when you look at Tank Bigsby, sub 3 yards per carry. Dearness Johnson also sub 3 yards per carry. In that regard, Travis Etienne was about a yard per carry, better than his backfield mates. It's not like they've added a ton of competition either. So you can make some cases that the market still doesn't know that what Travis Etienne sort of is, but it gets a little trickier a year on. And we've seen some of his best play probably. The reality for running backs is the first 3, 4, 5 years of their career, that's their prime. I mean, maybe not the very first year, but second year 2 through year 5, that's typically the prime for a lot of these guys. Unless you're Raheem Mostert, then your prime is when you're 31. But, I mean, Etienne's already kind of maybe trending towards the back end of that. Maybe we just saw the best year of his career. I don't know. Maybe he has another step. Maybe he has legendary ceiling. He's sort of that transition guy for me this year. But it starts to get tricky when you get into the guys that the market is telling you they don't buy, that that player can provide the type of efficiency necessary to be a fantasy superstar, right? That's what this commentator is saying. And I hear you. He had saying the dead worst offensive line in the league. We've not seen him in an optimal situation yet. He's one you can play both ways, or you can make the argument both ways, in my opinion. All right, this is going to be a receiver pick. Devonta Smith has already gone there at 17. I mean, this is a fairly straightforward Nico Collins pick for me. Really like the Houston passing game, as we've talked about. Ayuk, a little concerned about the overall target volume, and especially when I've already gone. I want to play Ayuk in situations where I'm heavier at receiver. It's only round 2, but if I start with an anchor running back, again, Ayuk only 105 targets last year, extremely, extremely efficient, has the weekly upside, does have a lot of games for a round 2 pick where he only had like 3 catches or fewer. He's an elite talent, but the Niners are just so good that they run a lot of their offense closer to the line of scrimmage with CMC touches and Debo touches, and then they get vertical sort of as needed, is at least what it feels like at times with them. And Ayuk's game log tends to reflect that, or at least that's the way that I read his game log. I think it's hard to imagine a scenario where he, without a major injury elsewhere, shoots up to 130, 140, 150 targets. And I've argued because of the way that the main way that would happen is if they change his role, because they made him a high ADOT guy last year, and he's such a good winner down the field that that was great. It didn't only get deep shots, but it was like if they're going to go vertical, it's going to typically be to Ayuk. And schematically, against a lot of defenses, that's going to force the safeties to be back and rolling over coverages, and then that's going to open up some of the stuff underneath. And so in some ways, he winds up being a decoy until defenses start coming down into the box against San Francisco and saying, we're going to make Purdy beat us deep, which some teams did late in the year, which was kind of fascinating. You had this MVP candidate where defenses are sort of saying, we actually think our best way of beating you is forcing you to throw down the field on us. You had the Ravens, obviously, come into San Francisco and cause a 4-interception game. You had both the Packers and the Lions have interesting games in San Francisco in the playoffs and probably deserve to win each of them. One of the key plays in the Lions game is a deep throw that bounces off a Lions defender's face mask to Ayuk. But yeah, in terms of like whether Ayuk's role and usage is going to be, optimal for what their offense wants to do and actually does with heavy volume, he's going to be good, especially if defenses start to come down into the box more and force Purdy to throw downfield. That's where you start to get the 3+ yards per out run that Ayuk posted last year. Start to get the elite efficiency. It's just a tricky thing because fantasy is a game of volume. It's a tricky thing for me in the second round. I kind of tend to like Debo over Ayuk in terms of what the ceiling scenarios look like. Ayuk's efficiency already so maxed out last year. I don't know how he could be more efficient. I'm notably not a guy who thinks that regression to the mean has to happen. He's good. He's going to continue to be good. He's going to continue to be efficient. But it's like, how much more efficient can you be than 13+ yards per target? That's the part where you got to start to add targets. He had 105 last year. Anyway, Nico has target competition, but I think that team could throw a ton, and I think he could be the guy who really – it's a different offense. They're going to be vertical. They're going to be a higher ADOT passing offense. They're going to – the offense is made out of C.J. Stroud pushing the ball to then sort of open up things underneath, as opposed to like Shanahan's offense is made out of misdirection and – creating for years, it was just creating easy throws and yak. And he's so good at that from a scheme perspective. All right, let's go over to, I think this was a BBM. I've had a lot of Bijan picks, and I mentioned I've been landing on a lot of Jefferson picks in this group. Have not had a lot of Amon-Ra builds in this 100 draft group. So at 106 here, that's a fairly straightforward pick for me to kind of just level it out. I love Amon-Ra, another player that I really like. The first round for me, I do want to have exposure to basically all of these guys: McCaffrey, Lamb, Hill, Chase, Jefferson, Amon-Ra, Bijan. But I am pretty comfortably Bijan over Brees in a way that I'm getting concerned about my overall Brees exposure. That's not like a skill-based point. That's based on the Rams offense in Atlanta and how, Bijan could really consolidate. If Zach Robinson brings over a version of the McVay offense, Bijan could really consolidate snaps and usage. The Jets go add another backup running back who's making camp waves. Braylon Allen, it looks like he's going to have a role. Aaron Rodgers plays slow. They're more willing to substitute within a drive and things like that than, the whole point of the Rams stuff that I keep mentioning is they don't like to substitute. They don't want to let the defense match. They're going to keep Bijan on the field for a whole drive and then do it again the next drive potentially. Feel like, the Jets backup running backs will factor in a little bit more. Now, Brees, every touch can score a touchdown. So, does that even matter? But in terms of how easy it is to get to the 2,000 total yard season, I don't know. It's still going to be easy for Brees because he's really good too. I worry about not having enough Brees. AJ Brown's the one in the first round I'm not getting enough of because that ADP has risen to where he's now going comfortably ahead of Puka and Garrett Wilson in every draft. And I think it's actually like a half tier break there where Puka and Garrett to me have to be ahead. And so that's a little bit of a stance for me in the first round, but otherwise trying to get pretty balanced where it makes sense. I've talked about this before. I'm not going out of my way to take guys way ahead of where they belong. But when it's a toss up like a Jefferson Amon-Ra, if I get a ton of 105s, I'll take some Amon-Ra there over Jefferson because I do feel like it's a very close thing. All right, we're going to go to this eliminator that has a 4-hour clock. Well, that was fairly straightforward. We are once again at the 111 where I told you guys you're never going to see me take anyone over Garrett Wilson when this board presents itself. We got another pick made there. GM guys, what is up? Casey says, friendly reminder, we haven't gotten the Rams running back room right the last few years. Maybe it's just me, but I'm gun shy to have any big takes on the Rams. Fair perspective. I think, part of that just relates to Akers and the guy who had the draft capital. And then they really wanted it to be Akers, so to speak. And then he was hurt. And then they've been talking up Kyron for 2 off seasons. He got hurt in 2022, wasn't really able to make good on it. 2023, you get, I hear this point that, essentially it's saying that McVay can change his opinion relatively quickly, but I feel pretty good. Let's go to the wheel of names. For those watching on Twitter, you guys aren't going to know what's going on here. Every episode, I spin this wheel. We land on a team. We take a moment to remember some guys typically from past fantasy football lore, early 2000s, 2010s, some fun names. You get the Roy Halloos coming up and stuff like that. It's always fun to remember a few names, take a few minutes. And then we're going to talk about that team specifically. I like to jump into their Pro Football Reference page, some of my stats stuff, talk through what I expect from an individual offense. We've done this 12 times. We've had 12 teams removed. We are now down to 20 teams. And today's team is the Steelers. Wow. There's a lot of good. Remember some guys on the Steelers, and then we got to talk about Arthur Smith on today's show, which maybe I didn't want to do on Twitter Day. Antoine Randall L. immediately comes to mind. Hines Ward, Amos Zaraway, Willie Parker, Jerome Bettis. They're like the Steelers. We could do this. They had some fun teams. I'm trying to think back even further to the earlier 2000s, almost the very beginning of the Ben Roethlisberger, or even who was the QB prior to Ben Roethlisberger? would have been like Tommy Maddox. You had Cordell Stewart. Yeah, Cordell Stewart was super fun. We got a Tommy Maddox in the chat. Amos Zaraway, Antoine Randall, Willie Parker, Martavis Bryant, Vance McDonald, Heath Miller. We got the Santonio Holmes Super Bowl catch. Great pull there. Plaxico, Cordell, and Tommy Maddox. Who are we missing? We're missing some running backs for sure. There's been some good Pittsburgh Steelers running backs. Maybe we hit on the bulk of them, but I'm going to now go to the franchise encyclopedia because this is one of those teams that I don't want to miss. Oh, Rashad Mendenhall's a name that is on the tip of my tongue. Obviously, Le'Veon Bell. I'll never forget what D'Angelo Williams did for me. We got Mendenhall coming in from the chat. Rashad Mendenhall. Mike Wallace is another name. Led this team in receiving 3 years in a row before Antonio Brown obviously took over. James Washington led the team in receiving in 2019. That was the Roethlisberger injury year where Mason Rudolph was their lead quarterback. You got James Conner. Go back further. I always like to go to this team records page here. Top rusher, top receiver. You had Mike Wallace in this range, Mendenhall in this range, the 2009 to 2012 range. You had Jonathan Dwyer leading the team in rushing in 2012, the year prior to Le'Veon Bell. I don't remember that. Yancey Thigpen, Charles Johnson, a couple years in here. Troy Edwards, the Hines Ward era, Plaxico. You got the Santonio Holmes, Mike Wallace, Antonio Brown. Feel like we're missing a few tight ends as well. Marcus Wheaton, Merrill Hodge, Emmanuel Sanders, pre-Broncos. That's a fun one. He was there as the third receiver with like the Mike Wallace years. Putt Daddy's remembering that Mendenhall had 4 shots at the goal line, couldn't score, cost him a playoff spot. That's why we're here. We're here to remember our biggest disappointments in fantasy. All right. Pittsburgh last year and Pittsburgh this year. I mean, the biggest thing to start with for me is the Falcons were dead last in pass rate over expected last year. They were even lower the year prior, but because the Bears were so low in 2022, they were second last. But you go over a 2-year stretch, Arthur Smith's offenses have been the lowest, the furthest to the negative in pass rate over expected. That's the way that the Russell Wilson offense has tended to trend, right? And people have called it the Russell Wilson offense, sort of regardless of where he plays or what coordinator or team he plays under. It's got to be a little bit run base. It's got to be a little bit play action to set up longer drops because he likes to, you can't just have him be a pure drop back passer. He likes to stay in the pocket too long. He likes to let routes develop, unleash the long, deep passes. And if you do that, you're going to take a lot of sacks. He has the high sack rate. You have the really high sack rate with Fields as well. Sort of regardless of whatever quarterback is playing here, a good number of the dropbacks, called dropbacks, are not going to turn into pass attempts. That's the big Justin Fields stat, right? His sack rate and his scramble rate are both so high. There's 3 outcomes on a called dropback: a sack, a scramble, or a pass attempt. Those 2 are so high that more than any quarterback in the NFL, the called dropbacks don't even become pass attempts, a.k.a. targets, a.k.a. chances for receivers to catch the ball and score fantasy points. That doesn't happen for Justin Fields in a meaningful way. And it's also somewhat problematic for Russell Wilson with the high sack rate. He doesn't scramble as much anymore. But when you combine those 2 elements, the likelihood that the pass rate over expected is low and the dropback number is low, and then the second element that there's a decent probability that a higher than average percentage of those dropbacks, which isn't 30%, but 10% compared to, or 15% compared to some offenses might be closer to 5% or something. You're taking another chunk of the dropbacks and not turning them into pass attempts. I feel fairly confident that the Steelers are not going to throw a ton of passes this year overall for both of those reasons, the called pass rate and then the percentage of dropbacks that become pass attempts is going to be even weaker than most teams. Obviously, at quarterback, we have all new quarterbacks. I'm looking at last year's stats. not super meaningful either. We don't have Deontay Johnson there anymore. Somebody at the very top of the chat said that they had been Pickens pilled. Please help. This is fine. Said, Ben, I've been Pickens pilled. Please help. And I get it. I'm seeing some of the remember some guys. Jesse James was a good one. Dre Archer, Jalen Samuels, Heath Miller was the tight end that I felt like we were missing one. That's the one that should have been said. Was an institution, played from 2005 to 2015. We got Tomlin plus Arthur Smith is the most extreme, established the run boomer combo I can imagine. I agree, man. I agree. That is a big one. So to me, Pickens has been a guy that I've been out on. I felt like he's an indication of when sort of a tier break happens at wide receiver he's now going ahead of T. Higgins. But for me, it was after T. Higgins gets off the board, Pickens tends to go. And that's kind of an issue. You have Pickens, you have Amari Cooper, you have Christian Kirk, who's risen into that group behind there. I like Christian Kirk. I feel like he's gotten pretty expensive at this point. I liked him more in the fifth than I do in the fourth. To me, that's where there's a little bit, and then there's a meaningful ADP break as well. I'm looking at the ranks on a different sheet right now, but I guess I'll just pull that up here. I'm looking at ADPs from Underdog. You see from Kirk at 43.4, you get the big drop down to Terry McLaurin at 49, and then another meaningful drop to Hollywood at 53. So this is where the ADP has the real tier break from 43 to 53 with only one player in between that. For me, Pickens, Cooper, and then Kirk was back here and has risen up. He sort of belongs back here. He belongs with the McLaurin and Hollywood Brown tier for me. And Pickens and Cooper, I would say, belong even further behind. I would rank Kirk ahead of them. And so I've not gotten much Pickens at all. He's one of my biggest stances against. And look, I've seen the tweets that like compare him to Drake London and things like that. It's one of the most meaningful reasons that I've kind of tried to emphasize again that we need to think through team situation. We need to think through the range of outcomes. So I talk about this probabilistic range. What can actually happen? How does this player hit a ceiling this season? George Pickens is good, man. Like he's a good player, but he wasn't elite last year in any like meaningful way. He got over 2 yards per out run last season, fairly narrowly. He had a really strong yards per target. The targets per out run, not quite as elite, but at the high ADOT, gave him a solid weighted targets per out run. He earned a lot of air yards, but a 19.3% targets per out run, not massive, right? Had some big blow up games. Obviously, Deontay Johnson was there, and now there's a lack of target competition. There's not been a lot of good hype around Roman Wilson. There's not been a lot of excitement about the wide receiver 2 spot at all. The last report I heard is that our old buddy Van Jefferson is in line to be the wide receiver 2. I think Pat Freiermuth's a good tight end and is some meaningful target competition. But when you think through, even if Pickens is the clear number 1, you think through, okay, where can his targets per out run get to? What's his role look like? Does his ADOT come down? Does he start to get the short and intermediate targets that a lot of these deep threats need to start to become the true number 1 wide receivers? Because there's a meaningful difference between a guy who's at a 13 plus ADOT and 20% targets per out run, or if that comes down to 11 ADOT and he gets a targets per out run up around 25%. I mean, the best way to talk about that is like DK Metcalf over the years. You look at him early in his career, 18.2%, 19.7% targets per out run at high ADOTs. They actually didn't come down that much, but a couple years later, he's at a 24% targets per out run at a 12.1% ADOT the year prior, 13.1. The ADOT did come down in 2021, 2022. It was part of the issue for him last year. The ADOT shot back up. The targets per out run went back down, which is essentially saying, again, average depth of target, targets per route. We're taking out some shallow targets. Like that's like when I talk about those 2 different types of profiles. If the ADOT comes down, the average is being brought down and the targets per out are going up because we're getting some more quick looks. We're getting some more slants. We're getting some more short game stuff. Can Pickens get that in this offense? Possibly. I don't think there's enough in what we've seen from Arthur Smith to be optimistic about it, right? From what Drake London had to deal with the last couple of years. The ADOT wasn't super, super high for him. Maybe the quarterback play will be better than it was for London. But London had some really strong targets per out run and still couldn't make good on a meaningful elite upside ceiling. I'm not saying Pickens can't be good. I'm not saying he won't have splash games and some legit upside. And, it is interesting when you start to think through the way that these fantasy contests go, especially the Underdog best ball tournaments. We need to have the 1 week upside late. He definitely has that. But I subscribe to the same theory that, I've talked about a lot from Jacob Sanderson's piece earlier this year, where he showed that the spike weeks tend to come from the full season hits. Pickens last year is one of the outliers where he wasn't great most of the year. And then he had an elite upside game in the fantasy playoffs that was like a huge advance rate game. He was good last year, to be clear, but 106 targets on the season. It's really hard for me to see him hit this true ceiling where he's like a first or second round player next year. Now, when people talk about the underlying, per route stats and look at him and say, look, this guy's done more than Drake London's done from a skill perspective. I think that might be true. I mean, I don't know that that's actually necessarily borne out when you look at targets per out run, you look at yards per out run, et cetera. But even if that's true, my point is, regardless of whether that's true or not, even if we take at face value that Pickens is better than Drake London, this is about as meaningful of a difference in situation as you're going to find in terms of whether these players can be stars and hit their statistical peaks. And that does matter. Situation is being underplayed in some corners of the fantasy world right now. Now, obviously, these guys aren't going back-to-back in ADP. There's a meaningful ADP difference. But when we compare them, we do have to recognize that London's now going to be in an offense where the routes and everything have been concentrated from a team level. You have the Zach Robinson stuff. And in addition to that, you have now a quarterback whose on-target rate, which was very low for everybody in Atlanta last year, is really high. He gets the ball to the players. When he throws the ball, you're more likely to get an effective target, a catchable target, an on-target target. And a high rate of his dropbacks are going to turn into pass attempts, right? We don't have the scramble rate with Kirk Cousins. We don't have the high sack rate either. He makes his reads and he gets the ball. He's a distributor. He's great for fantasy for those reasons. I was just talking about how the called dropback rate, how much of those turn into pass attempts. That's a not super important, but not unmeaningful thing to consider. And when you have these dropback passers that don't take a lot of sacks, that can read out an offense and get the ball out, then the dropback rate doesn't have to be as high for the pass attempts to at least be meaningful. Then if the dropback rate does get high, which it could in Atlanta, it should be higher than the last couple of years, you have the potential for above average pass attempts and valuable pass attempts. So the quality of the pass attempts are going to go up for London. All those things. Again, this isn't about London. We didn't spin the Atlanta Falcons today, but I've seen that comparison made. And in part, it's made because, look, London hasn't had more than 120 targets in a season so far. I'm trying to pull up his numbers real quick. 110 last year, 117 as a rookie. Why is he going to the 1-2 turn? We're projecting a career year for him. Well, in that offense, if you look at things from a target share perspective or a targets per route run perspective or any of those things, if you look at it from a projections-based lens in any meaningful way, you'll see, I often have said we don't want to put too much value on projections type stuff, but shout out my podcast series with Mike Leone. Make sure to listen to those. I do think that stuff is very valuable for these types of reasons. It is not hard to project Drake London for a career high in targets this year, and meaningfully so. And that's why he's going where he's going. On the flip side, George Pickens, again, like targets are still the lifeblood of fantasy football. George Pickens is going to have a really hard time getting above like 120 targets this year. And especially when I was just talking about for London getting to 150 and all that, Pickens has not earned volume yet in a meaningful way, over 20% targets per out run yet. He's got to come down, get those short, the ADOT's got to come down, get the short and intermediate targets. This number has to go up. But I just got done saying that the pass attempt rate's probably going to be low. the on-target percent, or I mean, not the on-target percentage, the percentage of dropbacks that become pass attempts is also going to be lower than it should be in most offenses because of who the quarterbacks are. And then what if Russell Wilson isn't great? What if Justin Fields isn't great? I can see the spike week upside better in best ball mindset around Pickens. But again, like the way that this profile plays out, and I think about it from a probabilistic range, what can actually happen, where the real ceiling scenarios occur, even if he's really good, which I think he probably is good. I want to pay a cheaper price than where like elite tight ends are still going, man. Or like Christian Kirk's going behind him. We talked about he's coming up. A reason I would take Kirk ahead of him is I feel like Jacksonville could be a really intriguing passing game this year, and Kirk could be one of the big beneficiaries with, Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. threatening downfield. Kirk was on like 120 plus target pace last year when he got hurt, was really operating in the short and intermediate range well. And again, target volume matters so much for receptions and yards and all of that stuff, which is what we care about. We don't necessarily care about who the best receiver is. Obviously, we do care about that as well. I'm not saying we don't, we fade talent and we try to be too exact with our predictions. That's kind of runs counter to everything I've ever, written about and argued as a fantasy analyst, is that we need to be humility-based in our projections. We need to understand that the NFL seasons are chaos. We need to largely think that things will tilt in favor of elite talents. But I just have a hard time when I look at the range of potential outcomes in Pittsburgh, buying back into an Arthur Smith offense, buying back into a Russell Wilson offense, and saying that this is going to be, have meaningful volume. And if it doesn't have meaningful volume, that it's definitely going to be high efficiency, which is the way that most of Russell Wilson's receivers have gotten there for fantasy in the past, is lower target numbers, high efficiency. Look at Tyler Lockett's whole career, right? Guy's been an efficiency marvel. And maybe Pickens will be that player, but it's hard to imagine in an Arthur Smith offense and at this stage of Russell Wilson's career, him carrying. And part of the reason Lockett's been so fun for fantasy so many times is there's been a lot of years where he's been cheaper than the fourth round, and we've been able to get third, fourth round production out of him. He's never been like a top 5 overall wide receiver or anything, because again, the target numbers for him have never been 150. You have to get there to be the league winning, slate breaking, fantasy superstar pick that you had to have. The other way Pickens buries me from not having a lot of him is that he's the player you had to have in one of the playoff weeks. But I also I don't see a reason why Christian Kirk can't be that player. Just because George Pickens has a higher ADOT and can be more of a splash player, I think Kirk can have 12 target games this year. If he has a 12 target, 10 catch, 150-yard game, he's going to be that player that week as well, right? Like one of the great examples of this is Devontae Adams, who was a really high target player last year, but wasn't efficient for most of the year, and then had a 21 target game in week 17 and, caught 15 passes or whatever it was and was massive. And so it is, if I'm going to say what if this is the guy you need? Yes, Pickens has upside, but so do more stable full season bets have upside. Wide receivers have peak spike potential. We've known that. It's been a DFS staple for years. We've known that about the way that wide receiver scores points for a really long time. So it's a tricky one for me. Freiermuth is a guy that I haven't taken a lot of because I take a lot of elite tight ends. I want to raise that number because I do like the Freiermuth profile. He had a worse season last year. If I want to make a bet somewhere here in the passing game, it's Freiermuth. And then as we talk through more about Pittsburgh, I'm not doing a lot of the Justin Fields stuff. I'm not doing a lot of the Russell Wilson stuff. The key other element to talk about, Pickens is one element. Freiermuth, I'll just say he'd be, another one. I'll just say on him that he had 15.9% targets per route run last year, was a career low. It really fell down, but he also didn't run a ton of routes, wasn't super healthy. First 2 years of his career, 19.5%, then 22.1%. Strong targets per route run for a tight end. I think you look at the whole package over 3 years so far, and you can still tell yourself that this guy could be an above average NFL tight end, a late bloomer, those sorts of things. I still worry about the pass rate. That's why I'm not taking a lot of Freiermuth either. But, people have talked about, the beat writers are writing about, Arthur Smith likes the tight ends. Freiermuth seems to be more of a fit for the Jonnu Smith stuff that Arthur Smith was doing last year than, what the fact that Kyle Pitts failed to meet expectations. He's a totally different tight end than Pat Freiermuth. So the Jonnu Smith type designed stuff could be a little bit of a boost to Freiermuth. I do still struggle to see him being the breakout late round tight end for a lot of the team-based issues and reasons that I mentioned. Russ has had some efficient tight ends in the past, but also has never really thrown to the tight end position at a really high rate. Again, the guys that get the most targets for him tend to be more vertical, high efficiency guys, but even that isn't a lot of targets. It's always been a lower pass attempt and target number in Russell Wilson offenses. I think you're really banking on efficiency, and especially at Pickens' cost. I mean, I'm willing to be like, the situation here, the range of outcomes here, he could be a small win. I don't really see how he buries me. Freiermuth can be a little bit of a bigger win because his cost is meaningfully lower. And I guess you could argue that some of the late receivers in this offense, because there's volume available for the wide receiver too, and no one wants to draft anybody. And that's, another reason you could point at that Pickens is probably overvalued. Is like, we're all this confident in Pickens, but the market's telling you that this passing game is not a fun one. Right? They're not drafting other receivers, and they're drafting Freiermuth late, even though there's a lot of people that like Freiermuth as a breakout tight end. So it's a fascinating dynamic for the Steelers and where they're at and how the market's playing them. They're really buying into Pickens at this premium price, but not buying into anything else in the passing game. That's weird. But yeah, Freiermuth at his cost is a guy that I could see. And then the running game. Those are the key other parts of the Pittsburgh story for 2024. I think it's going to be a split. We've seen Arthur Smith do splits, but both of these guys are cheap enough. Najee Harris, in some ways, had one of the better seasons of his 3-year career last year when things went back to more like a 50-50 split. I could see drafting some of him. I'm not super into him. I do think with more mobile quarterbacks, we're going to see a reduction in the pass attempts to the running backs as well, because the pass rate overall is going to come down, right? And a lot of it's going to be longer dropbacks, longer time in the pocket, deeper throws, or scrambles or sacks or those types of things. These quarterbacks don't do a great job of getting down to the check down to the running back. And so you're not going to see quite as many running back targets. Russell Wilson did throw to the running back a ton last year. I'm chalking most of that up to Sean Payton. That's been the Sean Payton's offensive staple over the years. Maybe he brings some of that over. Maybe that was like a step forward for him as a quarterback, that he was able to just get the ball out, take fewer sacks, etc. Maybe that's something that we carry over. I'm a little worried about the target rate for these two backs. Jaylen Warren's the one that I really like, though, because you have the efficiency, right? You go look at their yards per carry, compare them. It's not the only thing. You can look at the missed tackle force stuff. You can look at the yards after contact stuff. Like, Jaylen Warren is a superstar from those perspectives on a per touch basis. This guy's like really, really efficient, really good. He was 5.2 yards per carry last year. Najee was only 4. His missed tackles forced per touch were almost double Najee's per touch. His yards after contact per attempt way meaningfully higher than Najee's, which Najee's were still, solid in that, like not horrible. But yeah, more than a full yard per carry better because of some of that stuff each of the last 2 years. That was also true in 2022 when Jaylen Warren was a 4.9 guy and Najee was a 3.8 guy. Najee has not had a season where he's had a better than a 4.0 yards per carry. He can make some people miss at times, but he doesn't have the explosiveness to then gain the yards. In addition to that, Jaylen Warren does. That's more or less what the stats are telling you. So I think you do want to be prioritizing Warren, in my opinion, especially when you have a new coaching staff and all that stuff. They might just like Warren more. We're farther away from Najee Harris' first-round draft capital, giving him the deference as the lead back. Having said that, I still think Najee is a good value as well. Like, I think both of these guys fall into a range in zero RB builds where they could be worthwhile pieces. But there are so many good value running backs in that range as well that I don't find myself drafting a lot of Najee. I actually do think these two guys collectively, because they go back to back, essentially, they're both pretty good values independently, because you can talk to yourself about, contingent upside. One of them misses time. The other one gets to be the main guy for a stretch of time. That's important. But I do think these two guys both being like pricier than the Zach Moss, Chase Brown tandem, for example, is probably wrong. Like, we should probably be talking about the Bengals backfield as that much more valuable. I'm trying to pull up current ADP to make sure that's still 100% true. Yeah, so Najee's going well ahead of Warren. And I mean, I like Warren straight up better. And then you have Zach Moss going just behind Warren, and you have Chase Brown going way later. And like, I just straight up like both of the Bengals as a group and what their offense could mean for fantasy scoring better than the Steelers. Part of that is because some people will say, yeah, look, Arthur Smith's offense, this, that, and the other thing. But like, go look at the look-ahead lines. Go look at the projected team points for this season. Pittsburgh is like 24th in scoring expectation this year. The Bengals are 6th in the NFL. That translates to, based on my little regression that I've run that I use in projections, that translates to about 47 expected touchdowns for the Bengals and about 37 for the Steelers. That's for the whole offense. But yeah, I mean, a 10 expected touchdown difference probably going to trickle down to the running backs and how they're brought along and how much scoring they can have. So I do like taking some of these guys. Again, Warren meaningfully better than Harris in that stuff last year. Harris did have the more touchdowns. You can certainly mention that point, and still got the better usage, more touches. That's one of the key things about Harris. He had 381 touches as a rookie, led the NFL, right? 313 the second year, 284 last year. This is a guy who's been, I think, being a workhorse is a skill. He's been able to carry the ball 280 plus times or touch the ball 280 plus times all 3 years of his career. That's a meaningful stat, in my opinion. For Warren, last year, I think was his first 200 touch season. Yeah, he had 105 touches as a rookie, 210 last year. But it's just so impressive for him that as he added volume, he actually got more efficient in some ways, looked even better. Jalen Warren's a stud. I don't know why people, consistently want to still take Najee ahead of him when he's just been the better and more explosive player. It's purely volume, right? But we don't even know that Arthur Smith views it as Najee ahead of Warren. And we're in the final year of Najee's contract. Again, I think we saw some positive stuff from Najee last year too, but this is not an offense that I'm very in on. I think that's enough talk about the Steelers overall. I do just think they're not going to be necessarily great. I'm not super high on, again, Arthur Smith and the whole offense. One of the key stats that's been out there is that Mike Tomlin teams have never finished below 500. And I think that's a fair point. I think Mike Tomlin's a really good coach. I want to make that clear. At the same time, there's always context. That's one of those stats where it's like, okay, but contextually speaking, this is very clearly the worst roster that he's had, like ever. I mean, maybe not ever, but it's a team that for most of his tenure, he built some really great defenses, and hats off to him for that. He had Ben Roethlisberger, a Hall of Fame quarterback. He had some elite skill players in Antonio Brown and Le'Veon and some of those guys for that stretch. Before that, they had Hines Ward and all those guys. We talked about a bunch of really fun names with Roethlisberger at quarterback who you don't have anymore. Now late in Roethlisberger's career, maybe there were some years where they weren't that great and they were able to overperform like their point differential and get some extra wins. And people have pointed to that and said, look, Tomlin gets more wins than he should. And there's probably something to that. I buy that. But the scoring was weak. We don't care about wins and losses for fantasy. The scoring was weak in those years. And I do think it's hard to sustain outperformance of like point differential and that kind of stuff every year forever, right? I think I would take the under on their wins. I think it's like 8.5, and people are I think the people have started to bet the under. I mentioned this like a month or two ago when the price was actually to the over on Stealing Bananas episode, that I think it's one of the better. I thought that at that time when you could get, I think, plus money, I thought it was one of the better unders you could take, because I just think in more than 50% of the outcomes, Mike Tomlin's inability to finish under 50, under 500 is not going to hold up, right? Like it's just hard for it to hold up in this division, right? They're the weakest team in the division, in my opinion. They have a good defense still, but The Bengals, the Ravens, and the Browns are all pretty strong teams on paper. I'm not, please don't come at me, Pittsburgh faithful. I'm not trying to say like the Steelers have been good in the past for sure, but I don't have a lot of faith in Arthur Smith. I don't have a lot of faith in the quarterbacks. I don't have a lot of faith in, you look at the way that Arthur Smith played football the last couple of years and had a very run-based offense. And one of the things that he did well as well was he did outperform his point differentials. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but I remember looking it up and like they were closer to 500 most of his years, but he only had like 2 wins of larger than 1 score in his entire time in Atlanta. I mean, maybe it was 3, and they had something like 8 or more losses of like, 14 plus points, like these big blowout losses, and never really blew other teams out. Again, don't have the exact stat. You'd have to go dig into it a little bit. But they tended to fare well in 1-score games. They played a lot of 1-score games, lower scoring 1-score games, played slow, kept the game within reach, played defense. And I think that's how the Steelers are going to play. That's not really a fantasy offense that I want a piece of, especially when you start thinking about the opportunity costs. Like, what am I giving up? Well, I'm giving up a spot where I could take a player from a fantasy offense that could be elevated, can add to what a player can be. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we've talked about in the last couple of years as well. The idea of like the haves and have-nots, the offenses that actually matter in this era of the NFL and those that don't. And it's been a widening gap, and this is one of the have-nots for me in 2024 that I don't want to be overexposed to. I want to get access to those teams that the market projects to score a lot of points this year, right? The top of that is San Francisco, Detroit, Kansas City, Miami, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Dallas, Houston, Green Bay, Philly, the Rams, Atlanta, the Jets, the Jaguars, the Bears. I mean, all of those offenses, I'm like, yeah, I can see secondary pieces bubbling up and being studs. Pittsburgh's offense, I'm like, I don't even know if I can see the primary pieces being studs. That's an important consideration. All right, that's enough on the Steelers. Let's go back to the draft room. Let's make a couple picks. I got to get back into the chat. This is where I fall behind the chat when I spin the wheel. Oh my God, I think I'm just adding on the clock. This stream may never end because I'm in 100 drafts. The chat loves to joke with me that I talk so much about certain topics that I get back on the clock in new rooms, and I'm not getting enough picks done to ever actually get caught up. Stream doesn't end until I get caught up. I'm not going to finish the stream and go make a bunch of picks. I got to get my picks caught up. And yeah, we may have just ran into that problem again. Although these are, again, fairly easy picks. What did I just jump into? I think I jumped into a BBM. It gets a lot trickier. And the next few weeks of me doing streams, it's going to devolve into, because it gets trickier for me to make the picks quickly when I have a team built out. It's a lot easier in the first round to just click a name. But then I got to start thinking of correlation and all the other, important factors. And if I have 100 drafts going, which I've never done more than like 45 at a time, so we're doubling that, things can get tricky. I've taken a lot of Jefferson because I got a lot of these 105s, like a lot. I've done it at least like 6 or 7 times in this group. I'm going to wind up with just a ton of Jefferson and BBM. I think I already did one Amon-Ra above Jefferson. I got a decent amount of Bijan too. For me, this is starting to become a diversification question. I really do like Jefferson. I've taken him a couple more times today. I wish there was a way without clicking on 100 different drafts for me to figure out how many times I've clicked Jefferson in the last few days. Let's do another Amon-Ra. I haven't done a lot of Amon-Ra's. I do really like the Lions offense. I just got done talking about, the haves and the have-nots. The Lions offense is a have, man. They not only was Amon-Ra a hit last year, Sam Laporta was a hit, Jahmyr Gibbs was a hit. David Montgomery was a hit. I mean, he was a solid play. Trying to scroll through the chat a little bit. Fields 1 read targets to Pickens in week 17 against the Chiefs going to be so tilting. I mean, yeah, that's going to be brutal. Ooh, Benny says we're naming the Steelers. Anyone gets a Yancey Thigpen. That's a fun one. How does there not being a number 2 hurt Pickens? I wasn't trying to make that point, I don't think. Maybe not drafting other Steelers pass catchers is actually a bull sign for Pickens. I mean, I understand that point. You guys are saying that literally the only passing option in the passing game is Pickens. I think that's good point that I don't buy, and I need to I'm trying to figure out how I want to articulate. It's the same reason that I'm willing to draft all 3 of the Texans right now, even at cost. And I've talked about it, so I kind of want to talk about this the inverse way. I've talked about the idea of the Texans and teams like them, the Cowboys in past years when Lamb was a rookie and you had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, and all 3 of them were getting drafted reasonably high. The Bengals, when you had Jamar Chase as a rookie and Tyler Boyd was still going high, and you had T. Higgins, that was the same season. It was the year we really talked about it a lot. The idea is there's contingency upside. If 3 receivers are getting drafted high from the same offense, it's saying something about the offense and about it's a rising tide can lift all boats kind of a point about a passing game and the expected pass rate and the volume. And then especially if one guy misses some time in an offense like that, where you are already willing to draft all 3 in the first, in the single digit rounds, purely on pass volume, on expectation, on situation alone. What happens when that consolidates to 2? Now suddenly, the Niners are a great example of that this year, where they're all going really, really high. But you can also see scenarios where contingency-based upside is elite. And the one guy who's not going high is George Kittle, and he's, I think, my highest owned tight end. I just don't understand how Kittle doesn't get drafted more, because especially like when people start talking about the Ayuk thing, I was talking about the targets earlier. People often say, well, what about if Debo's out? I'm like, if Debo's out, then George Kittle's an absolute smash, right? Because their ADOTs overlap a little bit more. And Kittle is so much cheaper that the contingency-based point that I can make on Kittle is a lot stronger and a lot more compelling than Ayuk, who's in the second round. And also Ayuk is a vertical receiver that Debo's not doing a ton of that stuff. Does it mean more targets for Ayuk? Yes, obviously. Like, definitely the case. I had this conversation in the Ship Chasing Chat Discord channel a few weeks back. Any team that has a player of sufficient skill go out is going to bump the usage for the other players of sufficient skill in that passing game. That's just going to happen. But relative to that, for other players where the contingent value is the most, or maybe a little bit lower, I argued that relative to other situations that Ayuk's contingent value might actually be less. Meaning there is a bump to Ayuk, but because Ayuk and Debo do such different things, if Debo goes out, that it might just mean more of a bump for McCaffrey and Kittle, and whoever else, gets some of that usage underneath. Maybe Ricky Pearsall starts to fill some of the Debo stuff. I don't know. Some of the catch and run stuff. He's an athlete. Maybe they bring Ayuk's ADOT down at that point. Maybe they do more, but there's this possibility that Ayuk is still just serving his vertical route tree role and not having a massive change. He would have some change. Certainly. They would run more of the offense through him. Certainly. I'm not denying that. I'm saying relative to the contingency upside of other players when a key teammate goes out, because their skill sets are not super overlapping, it might not be as meaningful. But that's not really the point I'm trying to make here, as much as when you have a lot of these key players in the same offense that are really good and they're all going high, it's saying something about the value of the offense. It's saying something about, and then you talk about contingency upside. You think about what that could mean if somebody misses time. It could be really, really impactful. That's my concern when I was talking about the other passing game weapons in the Steelers for Pickens. I understand that you could tell yourself a story that Pickens could see 40% of the targets. That just doesn't happen as much as you guys think it might. And again, we're talking about a player who hasn't even posted a 20% targets per out run season in his career. He's going to do that this year. I'm not saying he's not. I think he's good and he can earn volume, and he will. But it's really hard to project what his target earning profile has been so far to like a 30% targets per out run next year. To just like, he's going to consolidate everything. This guy, this profile, I mean, this is the way we use projections inaccurately, in my opinion, where we say there's no one else to threaten this workload, so we give it all to this player, which is more of an issue typically at running back. Like that's how we get into the dead zone type backs, the guys that we're just giving a ton of work to in the projections and saying, well, this guy projects really well, he's got to go in the 5th round. We're not doing that so much anymore. The dead zone running back lesson has been learned. This year we have Devin Singletary going in like the 11th round, and I'm like, at that point, he's probably just a value. Pretty easy to project him for all the work for the Giants. Who's their backup? I love Tyrone Tracy, but they don't seem to love him yet. I still think he's a good, really late pick, but the market doesn't. Eric Gray is not a particularly good. He's not really an NFL athlete. I mean, he'd be a little bit of an outlier from an athletic perspective and from a collegiate production perspective if he ends up being a meaningful piece of an NFL offense. And the quotes about him were like, we would love for Eric Gray to develop into the number 2. And it's like, yeah, when you're talking in March that you want him to develop into the number 2 by week 1, you're pretty much admitting that he's been on the roster for 2 years and we need him to still take a step forward this offseason. Okay, well, not my favorite bet. I'll just put it that way. But that's what happens. We're not doing that as much this year with the Devin Singletary type at running back. We used to elevate that type of player too high because there's no one to really threaten him. When I wrote about the dead zone the very first year, you go back and read that piece at CBS because somebody sent it to me earlier this offseason. I read it. The first paragraph's about how Alex Collins was the guy for the Ravens that year that was projected to get all the volume, and so he was going too high. He was the staple example in the opening paragraphs of the first dead zone piece. And I said, no one expected a rookie undrafted free agent named Gus Edwards to get 150 rush attempts. No one did that offseason. We don't typically know where the Gus Edwards are going to come from. I don't know if there's going to be one on the Giants this year, but Devin Singletary doesn't cost as much anymore because people have learned that lesson with dead zone backs. But the point that I'm making is sometimes something else bubbles up and threatens a player who just isn't good enough to handle everything. Alex Collins wasn't a 300-touch guy just because no one else on the roster was good. I'm not saying George Pickens isn't good. I love George Pickens. I actually think he's a really strong player. I don't think he's a target-dominant, alpha 40% target share player. I just don't think that's really what he is or who he'll be, especially in an Arthur Smith offense that doesn't consolidate routes and draws up play designs for second tight ends. And a chunk of the overall pass volume and the market share is going to go to players that we haven't even heard of, right? Like there's actually going to be first read stuff designed for Darnell Washington this year. And you guys think that George Pickens is going to get 40% of the looks because there's not a good number 2, as opposed to the fact that that's just going to mean that every defense is going to roll a safety over the top of him. And where he really wins is down the field. And now he's double covered down the field every single time. And he has to come win in the short and intermediate range, something he hasn't really shown an ability to do yet, at least per his targets per out run profile. You see where I'm, it becomes, we're saying the absence of a threat means we have to put it all on the one good player. But does he have that in his bag is the question you should be asking. All right. Other Steelers stuff, the more I talk about it, the more I'm confident in that take, honestly. Like I'm trying to challenge myself on it a little bit, but can we talk what a Pickens ceiling season would look like? I think this is a fair point. I think it would look like Arthur Smith's last couple years in Atlanta being not indicative of exactly the way he's going to run an offense, and that things are meaningfully different with the Steelers. And people have talked about Arthur Smith's time in Tennessee, and I understand that A.J. Brown was really good in Tennessee. My argument has always been that A.J. Brown was held back in Tennessee, that he was not getting enough volume. We could go look at early career A.J. Brown and the targets and the efficiency. I mean, 84 targets as a rookie, not really that meaningful. These next 2 years in Tennessee, he gets 106 and 105 targets, right? Yards per target is really high. The TD rates are pretty strong. Now, he only played 14 and 13 games. That's actually a key note that I need to make here. Not like he was playing full 17 games, but not massive in terms of the overall target numbers. The overall yardage isn't, I mean, he never has an 1,100 yard season in Tennessee. Again, didn't play full 17 games, but then he goes to Philly with the pass rate also isn't meaningfully high, and immediately has 2 back-to-back 140 plus target seasons with 1,400 plus yards, right? Like, so I don't think the Arthur Smith, A.J. Brown, Tennessee link, number one wide receiver link, tells the story that people want it to. In fact, I think it held A.J. Brown back statistically. I think A.J. Brown is one of the top 5 wide receivers of this era. I don't know that we can say that about George Pickens yet. I think if you're saying that about George Pickens, you're very, very high on him. I think A.J. Brown is that dude. I've always thought that. And he was held back from what he could actually become. So in terms of what a Pickens ceiling season looks like, I mean, you could do some 17-game pacing with some of these A.J. Brown numbers and say that could be it. I don't think Pickens is as good as A.J. Brown, guys. He's not a yak force like A.J. Brown, I'll tell you that. He's, A.J. Brown's another vertical receiver, but he also adds after the catch in a meaningful way. One of the big reasons, studies I did on A.J. Brown early in his career to argue he was different after just his first season was his rookie year was one of only like 15 seasons in the, in the ADOT era where a player had a 14 plus ADOT and also added 400 yards of yak on like 75 plus targets, had at least some volume. And the only other guys who, because yak and ADOT are negatively correlated, the only other guys who had these high ADOT seasons with big yak were the best receivers in the ADOT era. It was multiple seasons of Calvin Johnson, multiple seasons of Julio Jones, multiple seasons of Tyreek Hill. I think like a Larry Fitzgerald season was in that one. Just so many stud players. There were a couple guys that you're like, oh, he was good, not amazing. Like a Greg Jennings season, I think, is on that list and some of that stuff. But you're like, this is what, Deshaun Jackson was on that list multiple times. He's a high ADOT guy that I always added yak. But that's something that's so meaningful for yardage earning that you have a high ADOT, you're getting a lot of air yards, you're catching a lot of yardage on the throw side of the play. And then after you catch the yardage, in addition to that, you're constantly creating yards after the catch because your ball and hand skills are that good. That's A.J. Brown. I don't know if George Pickens is all that yet, right? And so, again, meaningful point here that A.J. Brown's stats were elevated by him doing things that peak Julio Jones, and that wasn't just rookie season a comp group. It was like 15 player seasons for everyone. And so there's like a multiple like peak seasons of Calvin Johnson, multiple peak seasons of Julio Jones. A.J. Brown on lower volume was that player as a rookie in the NFL. Again, there's some weird cutoffs and stuff in that stat. It's worth noting, but that's not like a whole bunch of like crazy stats that I was throwing in and using a whole bunch of crazy cutoffs. I was looking at literally 2 things. The third thing would be on volume, a decent amount of volume of targets. I was looking at 2 things: high ADOT and ability to create after the catch. Yak after the high ADOT element was factored in, because that's when you're a star. It's a Terrell Owens profile, right? Like and all the other players I just named, Julio and all those guys. Can you get downfield and then still be a monster? Or I mean, just be agile. Can you be Deshaun Jackson with the ball in your hand? Like create. I don't know that Pickens is that. He might be that to some degree. But in terms of what a ceiling season looks like, the A.J. Brown stuff to me is actually more of a red flag that the Arthur Smith offense has actually held back a superstar wide receiver in my mind. But I do think you would need the pass rate to be meaningfully higher than most of Arthur Smith's offenses in the past. Like they're going out of their way to actually throw the ball, which there's nothing that suggests that's the case. The quarterback decisions don't suggest that's the case. The quarterback talent doesn't suggest that's the case. The other receiving weapon moves, the fact that you traded away Deontay Johnson doesn't suggest that's the case. And, you have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, you have a good defense. Like they're going to try to win games through ball control and defense. But the ceiling season to me looks like the team pass volume being more meaningful than it is. His ADOT comes down a little bit. He starts to do more in the short and intermediate range, which has not always been Russell Wilson's strong suit. I mean, wasn't necessarily great for like Jerry Jeudy last year, but if he starts doing some Jerry Jeudy stuff and that fits better, maybe Justin Fields is the guy who takes over, and what Pickens does is a little bit more like DJ Moore. But I would argue DJ Moore is even a better player than what Pickens is, particularly, again, ball in hand stuff. He can do stuff around the line of scrimmage and create after the catch. He's always shown that, DJ Moore. Not saying Pickens can't do that, but he's more of a slender, traditional, vertical outside wide receiver. DJ Moore's kind of a tank. AJ Brown is a tank. But yeah, if you get like the Fields, DJ Moore type stuff where there was more first read in the short and intermediate range, a little bit of a lower ADOT, get the ball in his hands, let him make plays with the ball in his hands, in addition to the vertical stuff. The vertical stuff's going to be there. There's going to be downfield targets. He's going to make some splash plays down the field. But a ceiling season where he buries me because I'm fading him, I think is that lower ADOT, higher target rate. And then also you need the team volume to elevate, in my opinion. I think the efficiency can be there with Pickens. I just don't think all of those other things are going to happen. And so the way that would come together is like 120 or 130 targets probably for Pickens, maybe 135. But then he's really efficient on that. So he's getting up to, it's not quite this season for AJ Brown, because I don't think he can even get to 145 targets for Pickens. I honestly don't see that for a ceiling. Like that's a 99th percentile ceiling for him. So it's 135, but it's similar. It's, it's 80 catches and 1,350 to 1,400 yards, and you're getting close to double-digit TDs. Like that's probably, but I mean, that's AJ Brown's best season of his career, guys. Like, and that's in Philly. That's not an Arthur Smith offense. Like that's like the real, to that point, when I talk about floor and ceiling and stuff, and I talk about probabilistic ranges, I don't think I think a lot of guys have more ceiling. There's a lot of uncertainty, man. I can see a lot of things happening. So George Pickens last year was a 63 catch, 1145 touchdown guy. But there's a lot of things that I can see that have never happened before as being possible because I've done this for a really long time, and there's a lot of stuff that I've missed on, right? But if you want me to tell you a Pickens ceiling, it's like, yeah, it's not far off from like an AJ Brown peak ceiling, peak season. Statistically speaking, that's what it looks like. It's a high, he's consolidating targets. It's maybe a little bit of a lower catch rate because it is a higher ADOT still, even though his ADOT comes down. It's a high yards per target, yards per reception, and TD rate type efficiency season. That's why I'm making the AJ Brown comp, because he's always been really efficient with the yardage. It's harder for Pickens to get there because he doesn't have the yak, right? Like at least on the same level as an AJ Brown, but he had 388 yards of yak last year. That's good, but only 104 as a rookie. He's not, the AJ Brown, the rookie season yak was over 400. He had 465. He's actually had over 400 yards of yak 4 of his 5 seasons. Like AJ Brown's just an absolute beast in creating yards after the catch. Yeah. So anyway, that would be my my George Pickens ceiling season. Then there were some questions about Cordero, and this is I think a real concern. I just if you've watched Arthur Smith offenses the last couple of years, it's been maddening. For those who maybe haven't, it's been maddening for Twitter. For fantasy. He'll then get asked about it after the fact because all of these beat writers are getting notes from fantasy players that are saying you have to ask Arthur Smith what is he doing, and they're great and they've asked the questions, and eventually Arthur Smith's been saying, I don't give a flying rip about fantasy. I don't care about that. It doesn't matter to me. It's almost like he gets joy out of saying he doesn't care about stats. He cares about winning. He's went out of his way to say that the players in the locker room don't care about the stats either, which I don't know if that's actually true. We've had to take him at his word on that. And then you find out that when Kirk Cousins gets, signs with the Falcons, the first thing Kyle Pitts says is, I don't need you to donate to a charity or anything like that. I'll give you number 8 if you just give me some targets. Like that's the first thing Pitts said. So that doesn't seem to corroborate Arthur Smith's claim that the people in the locker room that weren't being used the way that the fantasy Twitter wanted them used were content with that. At least from my reading, I think those guys want the ball. They work really hard at their craft, and they want the ability to go out and show how good they are. But that's not Arthur Smith's focus. He's been very clear about that, and isn't going to be his focus. And so anyway, in terms of this type of thing, it's very much in play to me. It's very much in play that this is a good way of putting it. Pickens has yak ability, but it comes and goes for sure. I agree with that. I think Kevin puts it well here. I think he means 2024, but he says Pickens in 2024 strikes me as a great per route profile, but not enough overall team volume to truly hit in a big way. That's why I'm underweight on him. Slightly stronger 2023 in London. Right. If you get, Tom says, I think he could produce like 2023 Drake London. I think you could. That's not the move that you should make in the fourth round, in my opinion. I think you should be seeking more upside. That's a really important distinction. You should be seeking more ceiling in your builds and those types of things. All right. We got to make some more picks. The eliminator. Let's go to this draft. 108 eliminator pick. I've been taking Puka in this spot. We've seen it a couple times on stream already. I don't love to go anchor running back in the eliminator. A.J. Brown's the other guy with a decent early buy. Garrett Wilson, I've mentioned, isn't really the strong eliminator pick with the week 12 buy. There's a lot of ways to add the week 12 stuff later, including right away in the second round. You get, if Drake London or Chris Olave is there, those are two good eliminator picks. There's a lot of volume there, right? And both of those have drop back passers. You're going to get, I'm not sharing my screen. I'm sitting here like showing you guys stuff on screen, but not showing you. I didn't know this. Do the Steelers have the toughest schedule this year? I mean, they have a really tough division. Wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, and they made the playoffs last year, so they're playing a tough. Or I guess they were third in the division, so they're playing the third place teams. So they play the Jets, who finished third in the AFC East, the Colts third in the AFC South. Those are both good teams. They get Denver third in the AFC West. I guess I haven't really looked deeply at Pittsburgh's schedule, but they get Atlanta from one of their NFC matchups. And then they're playing the entire NFC East. So the Cowboys and Eagles, but they also get the Commanders and Giants. And the NFC West. So they get the Chargers and Chiefs and Raiders in addition to that Broncos game. Yeah, I mean, you get the Chiefs on that list. You get the Ravens twice. You get the Bengals twice. You get the Browns twice. You get the Eagles. You get the Cowboys. You get the Falcons as an upstart team, higher expected finish this year than last year. The Colts is a similar type of deal. Jets is a similar type of deal. That's a difficult. Their final 8 games are ridiculous. Their final 8 games after the bye are Commanders, and then their final 9 games, Commanders, and then it goes Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns, Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals. Both the Bengals games, both the Browns games, both the Ravens games, and then the Eagles and Chiefs, 2 recent Super Bowl teams. Rowan says he really liked the plot of Buying For on the eliminator being about super teams, not ugly clicks. Go check that one out. That was a really in-depth breakdown of the eliminator from my perspective. Ben says this really well. It's more than likely that the QB1 or tight end 1 is in the 4th round. What are the odds of Pickens is the guy you need? This is the way that I'm looking at it, is like or another receiver hits in a meaningful, like explosive way. Like I could do Amari before I could do Pickens. I'm not super into Amari either. He's getting a little older, but he had a strong season last year. High career high targets per out run. Really seemed to fit well last year with what this offense was trying to do, although a lot of that was with Flacco. But I could do Amari there and tell myself the Browns are going to be a little bit of higher pass rate, and they have Deshaun Watson, and he actually hits in a meaningful way, and the Browns are good, and all these things that, like, maybe I'm being too exact on my expectations for the Steelers, but I am being pretty confident that the Steelers are going to play a certain type of way, and it's not going to be great for passing. Anyway, this is the other great point. Even if it's not a wide receiver, like there's some strong tight end options in the 4th round, right? Or I would rather dip into some of the running backs as well. I mean, I've talked through not loving getting a lot of early running back exposure, but more so than Pickens at that price for me. All right, this is an eliminator that I need to make a pick on. Let's just do another Puka team. We're going to just be Puka eliminator bros. That's going to allow me to take Garrett Wilson over Puka in the BBM. I'll just tell myself I'm bouncing exposures. 112, Garrett Wilson goes 111. This is where you got to get creative. And again, I'm going to shout out Jacob Sanderson on the stream. Does amazing work at his Substack, Thinking About Thinking. He wrote a whole article about what to do at the 112 because you're operating from behind. The last 112 I got, I went Gibbs. I went all the way down to Debo. I talked a little bit about why I don't necessarily think Ayuk's contingent upside is massive relative to other contingent upside. Debo's a guy that when Ayuk was like in the doghouse that year, he actually started to get used in a vertical way. Like he had to go fill that Ayuk role, not like alignment. Like I had a question about that. And one of the things I was talking about, like, no, he's not going to go play Ayuk's position, but in terms of play design, I still think about everything, not positionally, but from an ADOT perspective. And I've been wanting to write an article on this, but to me, the way passing games fit is the way that offensive coordinators or coaches want to scheme it up. They need to attack different depths. They need to layer pass routes. They need to have somebody vertical and then underneath and all of this stuff. They're attacking space with their routes. They need to work in conjunction with each other. But it doesn't mean that like the X receiver has to run the vertical route, right? Like you can run a tight end up the seam to be the one who's attacking vertically on that play. Or you can run Debo, even as the motion man, whatever that is, the Z, and shoot him up the field. Or you can run a running back out of the backfield on a wheel route. It just takes a lot longer, but it doesn't mean it can't happen, right? And so Debo in a lot of the pass design concepts that year when Ayuk was, that's the year that Debo had the monster breakout season, 2021 or 2022, that he was like the 7th or 8th round pick and was the key to fantasy in a lot of ways. It's the same year Cooper Kupp broke out. I guess it was probably 2021. But Ayuk was sort of in the doghouse that season to start the year. And they were using Debo Samuel's ADOT elevated meaningfully that season from the year prior. He got air yards. He got some downfield looks, which pulled that ADOT stat up. It's an average depth of target. It doesn't mean he was playing a different role. He was still getting all this stuff around the line of scrimmage. It just means he spliced in some long pass attempts, some vertical pass attempts. He got some air yards, and then suddenly the average was rising. Again, like some of those stats aren't, you got to use them the right way. And so that's the way that I would think about the way that his ADOT has bounced around. Anyway, some contingent value, I think, for him in a meaningful way if Ayuk were to miss time, because then there's nobody to fill the Ayuk role. The inverse, I was arguing earlier, if Debo goes out, you have McCaffrey and Kittle operating in those depths in a lot of the scheme, and you don't necessarily have to change Ayuk and bring him into the shallow area with a lot of his route concepts, because then who's attacking vertically? Then your whole passing game is shrinking. So anyway, when I did this correlation creative move from the 112 that Jacob Sanderson has written about, I enjoyed the idea of doing Gibbs with Debo, because that's going to be a very unique combination, and you get the week 17 correlation. There's not going to be a lot of scenarios where Debo Samuel is paired with Gibbs. He's not falling to the 3-4. Not a lot of people bringing him up to the 1-2. And so if Debo has this monster season, and he's basically in this same flat tier with Marvin Harrison and Drake London and Chris Olave and Nico Collins, and everyone has talked about how the second round is a flat tier, stretches into the third round. And so that's the other reason I went all the way down to Debo instead of Ayuk, is that Ayuk's ADP a little bit higher. And if people are thinking to do this, they might stop on Ayuk to do it. But I haven't done it with Ayuk yet. So let's do, as much as I've talked about Ayuk not really being worth this, I kind of went forward with that a little too quick, clicking on Gibbs. Now I wish I wasn't doing, I mean, I'll do a Gibbs Ayuk. That was one of Jacob's recommendations. We'll trust Jacob. I don't think that would be my favorite way to do this. I probably should have went another direction. Like another one he brought up was Olave Adams. Bring them both up to the 1-2 term. There's not going to be a lot of Olave Adams pairings. They get the week 17 correlation. I should have done Olave Adams there. I will on my next 12. We got a Gibbs Ayuk there. All right, this is going to be an easy one. Here's a BBM where I'm at 111, but Garrett Wilson already went 110. Similar deal. You're not going to see me pass up Puka for Gibbs or Harrison or London or something like that. I'm going to take Puka at 111 there in every draft. Let's go to this BBM, 111, and I have Puka and Garrett Wilson there. Meatwad says, I promise you there will be more Olave Adams teams than you think. I have definitely seen that a decent amount. I'm jumping into this draft. I don't know. Haven't seen this Russ 9 name yet. I assume, regardless of whoever I take here, that he's going to take the other one. We get Gibbs at 107 in this draft. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that I can get both Puka and Garrett Wilson. It seems pretty unlikely. And if I think it's pretty unlikely, then I might just take Garrett Wilson, who I actually do prefer slightly, but I do prefer him because I think Garrett Wilson probably should be about the 107 this season. Your mileage may vary on that. Yeah, like Andrew just said, people are just starting to do some of this stuff now, and the tourney's 40% full. So that's part of why the Debo and Ayuk stuff are going to be uncommon. I tend to agree with that too. You saw Puka fall to 14 the other night. Might be better odds for him to fall than GW lately. That's kind of what I was just thinking, is like Puka's the one that people are like worried about right now. This is interesting. Do we think ADP matters that much in Eliminator? I've been disregarding it at a point where it feels so inefficient. I think your build structure matters more in an Eliminator than any other stuff. And I do think eschewing ADP value to get your build right. I'm not saying do that at all costs, but I'm with you on that. In an Eliminator, I'd be more willing to throw ADP aside and focus on my actual construction. We're going to go Garrett here. I wanted to do it anyways. And I think maybe there's a little bit better chance. Actually, that's probably not right because Marvin Harrison is right there. And then if you can get Puka Harrison, you're getting a correlation boost as well. It's probably the case that neither Puka or Garrett Wilson was going to come around. Here's another BBM that's at 206. Let's jump into this. Ayuk is the ADP value. Waddle's the guy I'm kind of in love with here. Talk about contingent value. I'm going to snatch him up because this is an anchor RB situation where I want a guy who I think can just really smash volume-wise, and that is Waddle. He was, I think, 12th in my weighted targets per out run stat when you include the air yards and stuff in the NFL on a team where Tyreek Hill was the runaway first highest ranked player. So Waddle was, as the number 2, meaningfully better than a lot of number 1s in other offenses. Mike McDaniel gets the ball to the players that they want, or that he wants to get the ball to. If Tyreek Hill misses time, I think that definitely transfers over to Waddle. I was kind of talking through how I think it's a little bit more opaque for the 49ers because they have other, strong players in the passing game. But Miami's largely these two guys. Last year, the third best player in the passing game had like 350 yards receiving. Third most productive. I think that's going to be different this year. And I know there's a lot of people, we've done the Jonnu Smith conversation on the show. I'm not super in on that play, et cetera. But I think you can look at what Waddle did while Tyreek was healthy and feel very confident that Tyreek were to miss time, Waddle has the most, maybe not the very, very most, but certainly a lot of contingent upside at that point. This is another Bijan team. Waddle has gone here. The ADP value is Jonathan Taylor. I don't start a lot of drafts RB. This is a BBM. I could go to Adams, and there's actually a little week 15 correlation with Bijan there. I think Adams is a reasonable pick. I've taken a decent amount of him. We've talked about him too, but 175 targets last year. I think the competency of the QB play will be elevated this year by having Minshew there in addition to Aiden O'Connell, who was solid down the stretch and was the guy in there when Adams had the huge week 17. I think they're going to try to develop O'Connell a little bit more this year. He had a better close to his season than I think people realize. A couple strong games. I think his final 4 games, he had 8 passing TDs and maybe no picks. I'm going to go look that up. One of those games was the absolute blowout of the Chargers in the game that, ultimately got, 8 TDs and no picks in his final 4 games. And it's not like he had massive stat lines. The one of those 4 games, he only threw for 62 yards. They went super run heavy in a win against the Chiefs. I believe there was some pretty bad weather in that game on Christmas Day. But the other 3 games, 244 plus pass yards, multiple TDs in all 3 games, including week 18 and that game against the Chargers in week 15, where they won 63-21 on whatever it was, Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football. Anyway, Adams got a ton of volume, started to click a little bit with Aiden O'Connell late. Maybe Aiden O'Connell can play a little bit. If he can't, Gardner Minshew is there. I think that having both guys elevates the floor of the QB play. Adams still earned volume in a massive way last year, tied for second best in the league in that weighted targets per out run stat behind Tyreek. Just was really inefficient. And maybe that's a sign that, by his own standards, certainly. Maybe that's a sign that he's starting to fall off and the age is catching up to him. Maybe that was just quarterback play. And if quarterback play rebounds a little bit this year, they've added Brock Bowers. Maybe that helps. Maybe that hurts. I don't know. They don't have a lot of other options. The difference with the Pickens point earlier is this is a pass game where I feel confident there's going to be a lot of volume in the pass game. When I'm starting to talk about them not having a lot of other options, the point I was making with Pickens earlier. And the other reason is I was saying maybe Pickens isn't that guy who can eat up all that volume, but Adams is that guy. He had 175 targets just last year, and he's done it a bunch of times. He's an alpha number 1. So even if there's not a lot of other guys in the passing game that are doing great, we collectively all agree that Davante Adams is a second-round pick because Pickens still going in the 4th, if you think that he could be a 170 target player, I mean, that's what the market would be, misunderstanding who he is. But I think that's why there's still some hesitancy with him. Anyway, Adams, clear alpha. We don't need to go back into the Pickens thing. I went long enough on that. Taylor's really intriguing. I'm hesitating here. I think Adams fits this build. There's the week 15 thing. It's nice to get a little Adams in this range. I'm just trying to a Bijan Jonathan Taylor start's kind of fun. I just think it puts you so far behind. It probably means no elite tight end, so you can get the receiver depth that you need to get. If you went with an elite tight end as well, you're talking about really needing to hit on some later round receivers. But I don't want my entire portfolio to not. I mean, I can see scenarios where Bijan and Taylor both have great seasons. All right. We're going to do one RB start. Do one high T start. Aiden O'Connell didn't complete a pass for over 45 game minutes on Christmas, this commenter notes. I love that stat. All right, let's see what else. Let's do some more BBMs before I get too tired. Then we'll start doing some fun stuff in the slow puppies. CeeDee Lamb at 102. We are back at 211 here. Saquon Barkley, the ADP value, not the pick I want to make. Devon Achane, an intriguing pick. Devonta Smith, you get the correlation aspect. Going to be a lot of Lamb, Devonta, now that Devonta's price has reached here. I'm trying to get some more Achane. Let's try a Lamb Achane build. We'll see if Devonta comes through. I would take Devonta if he did come through. If not, we'll talk about, Neighbors versus Cup. Probably not DK for me. All right, BBM. Garrett Wilson. Oh, I thought this was the other draft. For a moment there, I thought we got Puka through. Because I didn't see Puka. I saw Gibbs Harrison. But Gibbs actually went 107 in that other draft, which is why Puka was even there. This is a different Garrett Wilson 111 pick that I made earlier on stream. Fairly straightforward London pick for me here. I like the Wilson London start. Couple of year 3 guys that haven't had the great situations in the first 2 years. I think, the year 2 breakout trend is more, valid, and we should see the breakouts by year 2. But if it's going to take till year 3, it's probably because situation was holding back the player a little bit. Garrett Wilson has gotten like 9 million targets, or, whatever. 95% of his plays have come with Zach Wilson over 2 years, which is just like almost as bad as Drake London, who's had 100% of his plays called by Arthur Smith over 2 years. That's how I would summarize their situations. Jamar Chase. Olave is the pick here. I just matched week 12 buys on the last one. I don't know if I necessarily want to do it again on this one. I could do a Chase Waddle. Chase Waddle is going to be a lot more common. I like that start, but I mean, Olave has earned a lot of volume through 2 years, and they actually have like a pretty big hole in underneath targets coming into this year. We talked about that recently. Maybe that was on Stealing Bananas, but there's got to be something in, to take the place of Michael Thomas. Actually had like 80 targets last year. Chris Olave's had a really high ADOT. Rashid Shaheed's basically a deep threat. Does Olave's ADOT come down a little bit? Does he start to get that short intermediate stuff that Pickens I was talking about would round out Pickens' profile? Olave's already had at a high ADOT like a 25% targets per out run 2 years in a row. So it's already been really strong. His weighted targets per out run is just elite. But I think year 3 could be the year where his role sort of expands, the efficiency bumps. This is oh wow, I missed this. Meatwad sees that I was 1 pick away from a Chase Gibbs start. Gibbs goes 206 in this draft as Derrick Henry goes 205. Devontae Adams 203, Nico 202. That's an Amon-Ra Gibbs start. Seems rare. Sorry, I'm just sort of thinking through, and I'm both reading the chats and thinking through how I want to play this. I'm gonna go. Oh, we're just over 2 hours of streaming. We're gonna take a little breather, let a little dead air hit. Let's refocus. Let's lock back in. Jamar Chase. The Week 12 buy is a concern with Olave. I love Olave, but I also love Waddle. I'm just gonna break the tie away from the buy and take a Waddle there. Let's see what else we got. 3 more BBM 5s. The big thing with the Week 12 buy, you got 6 teams on the buy. You start stacking that up. It's not that it's an issue with the first 2 picks. It's that it becomes an issue down the line. How many times do you want to go to that well? Well, if it's a tie-break in round 2, just make the tie-break away from it so it doesn't become a problem if you get a nice value with the Week 12 buy on the line that you want to play. Puka here at 111. London Depot at the turn. There's somebody doing a little bit of creative 112 stuff. I like. That's a combo you're not going to see a lot of. That gives me Gibbs with Puka, which is pretty rare, frankly. So we're just going to take that and not question it. Get some of that, the guy that turned got a rare combination. Now I got a rare combination out of it, which is kind of nice. This is that team where I just took Achane with Lamb. Devonta Smith and Saquon both go at the turn. So we now have a Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Devonta Smith turn there. I'm not going to get a Lamb correlation piece here. I'm not super concerned about that. The question for me becomes, I just typically hammer neighbors here. Diggs is an erroneous faller to me, should still be in the discussion in this range, but you can get better prices on him, so why would I draft him in this range? Cup's rising, but I've already taken a good amount of him in the late third. I need to take a little bit more Metcalf. I'm not going to take him at this price. This is just going to be, you're not going to get neighbors much cheaper, I don't think. He's just a bet on a wideband player that could be a superstar. His profile is basically just as good as Harrison's, but he's going around later. And, I think maybe has a little bit of a argument for a better situation without Trey McBride. Again, if a player is good enough to just consolidate volume, then it's not it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're the only guy in town. Bijan here, and I get I just had the Adams versus JT discussion. In this one, I get Olave there, match the week 12 bye again, or Waddle again. Avoid the week 12 bye. This one, it's a week 12 bye, but at a different position group. It still hurts you with your flex a little bit, but I'm going to go Olave in this one. I broke the last tie towards Waddle. I'm going to break this one away, towards Olave, balance out the exposures a little. It means I don't get the Bijan Adams again, which I do think is a nice little, week 15 boost. Let's see. Is that all my BBMs? That's all my BBMs. All right. Let's do these 4 eliminators real quick. Garrett Wilson, pick 8 in this eliminator for me. This is one where I was taking so much Puka in the eliminator that I did do a Garrett Wilson ahead of Bijan, ahead of Brees. We get back into the second round. So Brandon Ayuk isn't really the profile I love for the eliminator, but he has a really intriguing bye. Week 9 bye is really nice for the eliminator. There's only 2 teams on bye that week. It's San Fran and Pittsburgh, who we talked about a lot on the show, and I have confessed to not being very in on this year. So getting a San Francisco player locked up here makes some sense. If I don't do Ayuk here, or Debo, I guess, really my only other strong San Fran play is Kittle. I got to kind of make a point to get Kittle, or like a Jalen Warren pick, or I may not have anyone on a week 9 bye is sort of what ends up happening. Purdy is an option as well. Waddle is a nice pick here as well. The week 6 bye is a little easier to stack up. Cooper Kupp's an option in the 3rd round, has a week 6 bye. I take all of the Kansas City receivers. They all have week 6 buys as well. I don't love Ayuk for this format, but the buy is just such an overarching element in the eliminator and wanting to balance the build. And I don't have Ayuk in a lot of other spots. So I'm going to go. Yeah, this is a fair point too. This is sort of what I'm thinking. It's he's interesting in the eliminator, and that he could have that run in the middle of the season where he nukes. He could just go absolutely off in certain games. And I'm basically saying I'm going to build a 0 RB team that's going to have enough wide receiver depth and enough sort of target stability on a weekly level if he does have some of those 3 catch games. But otherwise, I want ceiling in that build. I want so Ayuk doesn't hit my lineup some weeks, fine. I'll have players that can and hopefully can still carry me. When Ayuk does hit my lineup, especially when he hits those huge games, I'm much more likely to advance. And I've talked about really actually still needing ceiling in eliminator builds. So that's the move there. 3 more eliminators. We got Justin Jefferson, week 6 bye. Can't do Waddle with that right away. You can start to stack up those week 6 buys real quickly. I talked through some of the other receivers just now. So again, Ayuk is a consideration. But Olave is here as well. This has been a particularly running back, not heavy, but all the top options by ADP are these receivers that have come through a little. It's not like I'm staring at Taylor at the top of the queue. I think for this one, I mean, there's some concern with Jefferson that the rookie QB stuff can lead to like low volume in certain games. We just talked about the Aiden O'Connell thing last year, right? Like they had a game where he didn't complete a pass for however many minutes of game time. That's one of those things that can happen if your rookie's a little inconsistent. He'll have a game where he only completes like 12 passes. Like, I don't care how good you are. Like I talked earlier in the show about Justin Jefferson being an absolute star and maybe somebody who can just elevate. But if a guy only completes 12 passes in a game, you're not going to be able to catch very many. Knowing Justin Jefferson, he'll probably still catch 8 that game, but he might have a few floor games from a team level perspective where the offense sort of craters. I kind of like, I'm going to do Olave on this one, and I'm saying I like the stability to Olave's volume on a weekly basis. I'm telling myself pairs with Jefferson more cleanly. That Jefferson's like this year is somewhat more of like an Ayuk profile where we're talking about this weekly spike potential that's still so massive. God, I just did it again. I saw Olave and Barkley at the turn, and I saw Garrett Wilson, and I was like, oh, this is the one where Puka got through. And then Puka's there at 110. So there's another Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs that I'm going to do. Again, I'll build out 2 versions of that. That's fun. I'm really glad to have 2 versions of that. Oh, that's the eliminator I just did that in. See, now we're getting tired. I just went ahead and took an early running back in the eliminator. I'm not super opposed to that. Gibbs has a nice week 5 bye. I've done some eliminators with Gibbs intentionally. I just did it unintentionally. There's another Garrett Wilson 111 that isn't the Puka one. We're back on the clock here. This is another eliminator, and it's one where I want to take London or Olave, but they match the week 12 bye, which is more of a problem in the eliminator. You could turn this into the cash game type thing I was talking about where you're just trying to reach week 12. If you reach week 12, you make $50, 5x your money. I'm going to potentially do that, but I'm going to do it through Nico where I'm stacking the 12 and 14 buy right now. If at the next turn I wind up wanting to stack the 12 and 14 buy even more, I might make it one of those where I just don't take any early buys. And I'm more or less saying I don't think I'm going to make this team to the final, but I do think I'm going to try to make it to the money. So I went Nico on that one, so I didn't have 2 week 12 buys in my first 2 picks and really kind of hamstring what I'm able to do at the next turn. All right, some slow puppies. Let's make some fun picks. These are little $5 drafts. 110. All right, well, that's just going to be a Garrett Wilson over Puka because that's more fun. The rule is fun here. Garrett Wilson, Harrison, and Ayuk went at the turn. This would be another Garrett Wilson Gibbs. I'm going to do that. That's not as fun, but it is like a little more rare, and that can get fun later. I really don't mind having a lot of the same type of start if it's a start that I think is a good one. It's not going to be super rare, but Gibbs often goes at the 12-13 turn. We took Garrett Wilson at 110 here. There is no Gibbs. Let's do something creative here. Garrett Achane. Probably not going to be a lot of Garrett Achane. Garrett Neighbors. I mean, Garrett Waddle probably is going to happen a decent amount still. London and Olave matches by, like, let's do a Garrett Achane build. I like the 3-4 turn for a receiver. I want to get more Achane. We're gonna bring Achane up to 203. and turn in, the start of a fun little build there. That's just some guys that I really like. This is a Breece Hall start, so I kind of got to go receiver. Olave is like pretty clearly the pick, but matches the buy, and I'm kind of being wishy-washy about that. We'll do could do Waddle. I could pair Breece. It has to be a receiver. I don't take a lot of Mike Evans. I don't really want to get down to Devonta Smith or lower. I could do Debo. I think a Breece Debo would be somewhat unique. It's kind of fun in these puppies to just do some stuff that is a little different. I'm trying to see if anybody plays the Jets in the playoffs. The Jets have kind of a weird playoff schedule, right? Jacksonville, Rams, Buffalo. So I could go to Cooper Kupp. But I think there's going to, this puppy just opened. I was going to say there's going to be some teams that have Kupp in the third with Breece. And there probably still will be. His ADP is not that high yet. Let's do Breece. I'm just going to do Breece Waddle. No, I'm going to do Breece Debo. Why? Couldn't tell you. Just seemed like fun. I haven't taken a lot of Debo picks. We're all caught up. That's it. 100 drafts waiting to be picked. Actually, only 99 because this one is still not filled. If you want to come get in one, the sprint is waiting to be filled. That was it. We did it. 25 picks. Spun the wheel. Talked about the Steelers. I talked about George Pickens for like an hour for some reason. Nick loves Achane with 2 receivers, 31% through 70 drafts. I like that. We got Sus Edwards here says Chris Olave has 0 career 20-point games and half-point PPR. Dude's a 4th-round pick that we take in the second for some reason. My argument would be that pass production and distribution of scoring isn't past distribution of scoring is not particularly predictive of future distribution, like spike week stuff. I certainly don't think he's incapable of that. And in fact, I would probably give even money that he's going to do that at least once this year. Like it's not like that's going to be a predictive of Chris Olave's whole career. It's the only tournament on Underdog that's a poker tourney style payout structure, and I don't know why, but it's very comfy. This must be the Eliminator. I do really enjoy playing the Eliminator. There's different ways to attack it, as we've talked about. This is fine. Says, thanks for indulging me on the Pickens discussion. Man, I mean, we spun the wheel. We got the Steelers. I was gonna have to go to Pickens regardless. It was a fun conversation. I am gonna roll. We're only at the 2:20 mark. Some of my upcoming streams are going to be quite a bit longer. If you're watching on Twitter, jump over to YouTube, hit subscribe, turn on the notifications, like the video, give me some comments after the video. All that stuff helps me in the algorithm. But definitely turn on notifications because I don't do a good job of advertising when I'm going live. But I love to just hang. You guys saw this. I'm going to interact with the chat a whole bunch. Get as much of my or get to as many of the questions as I can. If you have questions, come hang with me, ask them. We're gonna spin the wheel. We're gonna play some fun little remember some guys type games, and we're gonna draft a lot of best ball slow drafts. So come hang. Hoosier just woke up. GM, good to see ya. But we're going to go later.